2 years ago, someone's father wrote a book. It told the story of a man living in a world of cripples. This man, blessed with extraordinary powers, chose to help the weak and save lives. In the end, he brought peace to the world, but at the ultimate cost: his life. Our story begins in Wellston Private High School, specifically in the cafeteria. Today is special because the famous chocolate cake is being served. One lone slice of the legendary dessert sits unclaimed until two students start fighting over it. On one side, we have Remy. She tells Arlo to hand over the cake, since she saw it first. However, Arlo doesn't care. He coolly reminds Remy that it's his since he took it first. This answer only infuriates Remy, and she releases her powers. Electricity starts flowing through her body as she demands the cake back. Arlo doesn't hold back either and creates a barrier to block Remy's electricity. They both clash dramatically, and yes, all this over a slice of cake. Meanwhile, in the background, a boy nervously watches the scene unfold. At first glance, he seems concerned about the situation. But his real worry? Missing out on grabbing at least one slice of the cake. This boy is our protagonist, John. Right now, John is stuck in class, bored out of his mind like the rest of his classmates. His thoughts wander back to the chocolate cake he missed out in the cafeteria when he notices Remy enjoying her slice next to him. His daydreams are interrupted when the teacher asks for a volunteer to solve a problem. John raises his hand. Is he about to show off his skills? Nope. He just wants to go to the bathroom. This clearly annoys the teacher. But he still lets him go. Before leaving, a classmate mocks John, but one piece of chalk thrown by the teacher decides to intervene. Well done, sir. You have my respect. On his way to the bathroom, John starts noticing a soft rumble coming from the other side of the wall. Great is his surprise when he sees a red-haired guy piercing through the structure of the building. Despite the chaos, and with his life at risk, John asks the injured classmate if he's okay. The red-haired guy stands up as though nothing happened, and we can finally see who threw him through the wall. Ison, an orange-haired guy with a not-so-happy expression, is the culprit of this chaos. And what caused this clash? A fight over a pen. First a chocolate cake and now a pen. Why am I not surprised? Despite his injuries, the red-haired guy decides to fight back, charging energy between his hands and releases a powerful beam. At this point, the only thing John can do to preserve his life is run and find another way to the bathroom. Good call, John. Otherwise, the story would have ended right here. John's life might seem very ordinary at first glance, but there's one big problem. In a world where abilities mean everything, he was born without one. John finally escapes the chaos and finds what he thinks is a safe path to the bathroom, or so it seemed. Just outside the bathroom door, he comes across two students. One of them is bullying the other, throwing punches as the victim cowers. John hesitates for a moment, watching the scene unfold. Despite being powerless, he decides to step in, before the situation escalates any further. With surprising courage, John pushes the bully back and firmly tells him to keep his hands to himself. The bully freezes, momentarily surprised. But then he looks at John, and his expression shifts completely when he realizes the school cripple was playing to be a hero. The sneer quickly turns into aggression as he lunges at John, ready to remind him of his place. The bully might be fast, but John is even faster. With a swift move, he deflects the bully's attack and counters with a perfectly aimed right jab to the bully's face. The force of the punch leaves the bully stunned. He clearly was not expecting this outcome. Then John notices something unsettling. A faint purple glow begins to emanate from the bully's body. His skin hardens, turning into stone, and his gaze becomes cold and menacing. John is unsure on how to handle this. He has already seen students nearly destroy each other over trivial things. But this is different. His life might actually be at risk. The bully starts rambling about the position a weakling with no abilities has in society, warning that if John keeps getting in others' way, he might end up dead. Meanwhile, we see the bully's victim has the ability to turn invisible. Without anyone noticing, he slips away from the scene. Not even a thanks? In a flash, the bully gets behind John and strikes with an elbow. Thankfully, John manages to block it with his arm. It seems the bully's ability isn't just about skin hardening. It's more of a self-enhancement power. The bully tries again to intimidate John, even demanding he beg for forgiveness. This only makes John laugh. The idea of begging someone so weak is a joke to him. He proceeds to list the names of the people he considers strong. Remy, Ison, Blake, the red-haired guy from earlier, and finally Serafina. a name we haven't heard in the story so far. This clearly infuriates the bully, but John doesn't flinch. He continues mocking the bully's ability, even says that without any power, he could easily defeat him. The bully charges at John, angered by his words. But John had been slowly moving toward the window. As the bully lunges, John swiftly grabs his arm, using his momentum to throw him out of the building. Once everything settles, John returns to his usual self, relieved and surprised that his mind games actually worked. His arm is broken and he'll need to visit the infirmary, but for some reason, that makes him more nervous than his earlier experience. John is now in the infirmary, and by the words of the doctor, he is irregular. Our protagonist looks more nervous than usual after hearing the doctor's words. Understandable. The doctor's attitude is very menacing, and he seems exhausted from dealing with John. At this point, he might even do more harm than good. The doc hands him a medicine to heal his arm. At least he's glad John pissed off only the stone guy and not one of the higher ranks of the school. Otherwise, not even the medicine would save him. John is about to leave, but one hand on his shoulder stops him. He won't go anywhere until the medicine takes effect. Meanwhile, on the rooftop of the school, a purple-haired girl is spending time chatting with someone. Her expression is very stoic until the person on the other side of the conversation asks her for help, which makes her smile slightly. Back in the infirmary, a girl shows up, annoying the doctor, thinking he has more work to do. She calls out to John, and we find out she's the same person from the rooftop earlier. Now, we learn two things. The purple-haired girl's name is Sarah, the same one John mentioned while mocking the stone guy, and she's been texting with John this whole time. John was going to stay at least 3 hours in the infirmary, and he was desperate to have some company. Sarah laughs and starts to leave for class, but John knows she never actually goes and begs her to stay. They spend time in the infirmary scrolling through their phones until John suddenly bursts out laughing like a maniac. Sarah asks him why he's acting like that. Wrong move, Sarah. This only makes John reveals the marvel contained on his phone. His score in Slappy Pig, but Sarah is not even impressed since her record is even higher. Suddenly, the whole school rumbles, cutting their free time short. We expect a sign of what's happening, but all we hear are the doctor's furious screams. He storms out of the room barking like an angry wolf. Apparently, another regular is causing a commotion somewhere else in the school. Before leaving, he warns John, "You better be here when I get back." John agrees, mentioning that he'll wait there with Sarah. The moment the doctor is out of sight, both of them decide to leave, completely disregarding his menacing words. Outside of the school, we encounter the rock boy again. His irritation hides any sign of pain. His mind is clouded with thoughts of revenge against John, and by sheer coincidence, he appears right in front of him. Coming out of his hideout, the rock boy grabs John by the shirt and looks ready to start another fight. Yep, this guy never learns. However, this time John isn't alone. When the rock boy notices Sarah standing with him, his fighting spirit vanishes. Sarah only needs to say a couple words to make the bully shake like jelly. He tries to act tough, but it's clear how shaken he really is. Sarah grows tired of his rambling and, without moving a muscle, throws the rock boy around like a rag doll. The force of the throw is so great that he slams into the wall and his ability starts to fade. Not tired of being beaten twice in a row, the bully tries to strike Sarah, but she dodges effortlessly, and with a soft hit behind the neck, Rock Boy falls unconscious. Sarah then leads the way out of the school as though nothing happened. She seems very used to dealing with people like him. We go back inside the school where the doctor is dragging Blake and Eisen. It seems the rumble was caused by a fight between the two of them. The doctor gives them a stern lecture about their behavior between classes. Despite this, they can't help but fight again over a stupid pen, which only annoys the doctor even more. Amidst all the chaos, the doctor notices someone missing from the infirmary. His expression makes it clear. It can only mean one person. Meanwhile, in a cafe, John narrates his life-risking experience of defeating the rock guy by throwing him out of the window. Sarah ends up laughing and mentions that living constantly on the edge must be fun. John's expression changes slightly. He just wants to have a peaceful life. He thinks that fighting over everything isn't the right way to live. Sarah disagrees, saying there's no point in proving yourself to someone weaker than you. John argues back, saying that the stronger aren't always right and using force to back up your point is pathetic. This statement unintentionally hits a nerve with Sarah. It was expected. After all, Sarah was born strong, and as a high tier, she has no real understanding of the life of those beneath her, especially John's. Suddenly, the news interrupts their conversation. It is mentioned that a group called Ember has left many victims on their way, and the last one was a vigilante. And apparently, that group's next destination is the city where John lives. Sarah breaks the silence, stating that those self-proclaimed heroes or vigilantes should mind their own business if they don't have the strength to back it up. On the other hand, John thinks they were just trying to help others. Let's take a step back, a year into the past, when John first transferred to Wellston Private High School. Countless sleepless nights, hours of studying, grueling exams. John did everything he could to get into Wellston, hoping that it could be different. A kind girl called Elaine approaches John trying to spark an innocent conversation between classmates. Everything flows smoothly until the word ability comes up. The room falls into an eerie silence. Everyone waits, eyes on John, eager to hear what the new guy's ability is. John tells the truth, feeling no reason to hide it, especially from someone who seems kind. But the moment the girl hears his answer, her mask falls off. Her true attitude surfaces. Disgust, pure and unfiltered, as she realizes she just wasted her time talking to a weakling. The rest of the class follows suit, hurling insults at him without hesitation. Outside the classroom, things don't get any better. Two guys pick on him, ready to show him his place. It's at that moment that John sees Sarah for the first time. Desperate, John calls out to her for help, clinging to the hope that someone might step in. But Sarah doesn't even glance his way. She walks past him without a care in the world. Reality hits John like a bucket of cold water. The flashback ends, and we find ourselves in John's bedroom. His peaceful sleep is rudely interrupted by a mysterious call, and he's not happy about it. Sarah is on the other side of the call. She wants John to join her on a trip to the mall. John tries to get out of it, mumbling something about needing to clean his house. But before he can hang up, there's a knock at the door. Sarah is already there. John opens the door and Sarah, all innocent, offers to help him clean. But as she steps inside, she notices something curious. Everything in the house is spotless. Except for one thing, a pair of fighting gloves sits on the floor. Sarah picks them up, and with that, their plans are set in motion. At the mall, John and Sarah spend their time searching and trying on some clothes. John is surprised at how quickly Sarah finishes her shopping. Soon after, they come across an ability gauge booth. For fun, John suggests Sarah to give it a try. Sarah initially scoffs at the idea, claiming those booths are a scam, but with a little convincing, she reluctantly agrees. At the booth, a girl shouting at the vendor. She is outraged because she can't believe her ability only got a power level of 4. She demands a refund, threatening the vendor to destroy everything if he refuses to do so. John grows tired of waiting in line and steps forward, asking the angry woman to calm down. His words, however, only fuel her fury. John stands firm, refusing to back down over a mere $10 refund. She's livid, her voice rising as she turns her threats toward John instead. The tension escalates and John tries to calm her, without success. Right when the woman is about to strike, John spots a security guard nearby and his attitude shifts completely. With a sense of security, he baits the woman into attacking him. Sarah smiles during the exchange, realizing what John is trying to do. The woman has had enough of John's taunts. She lunges forward, and at that very moment, John lets out a loud, dramatic scream for help, ensuring the guard takes notice. The guard intervenes immediately, grabbing the woman before she can land a blow. He demands an explanation. The woman pretends to be the victim. She points fingers at the ability booth vendor, blaming him for her rage. Without hesitation, the guard marches over to the vendor and orders him to refund her money. To John's frustration, the guard even threatens the vendor, giving him an ultimatum. This attitude annoys John. It's the same everywhere he goes. The strong always forces its way with bare force. Once the woman finally leaves, Sarah steps up to the ability gauge booth. The vendor seems nervous but processes her request. Moments later, the results appear. The vendor is surprised since Sarah got an ability level of 8, which means she is really strong. And as a reward, she receives a plush teddy bear. The vendor turns to John next, offering to measure his ability too. John waves it off, laughing nervously since he has no ability. The pair exits the mall, and the streets are already cloaked in darkness. John suggests taking a detour since the bus station is crowded and Sarah goes along with it. As they walk, Sarah teases John about his earlier antics. "I really thought you were going to start a fight back there," she says with a smirk. But the ending was anticlimactic, since he ended up screaming for help. John's thoughts are still wandering on the previous scene. The vendor was not wrong, but he ended up losing the money simply because he was weaker. Sarah tries to cheer him up, saying that at least he did not break his arm this time. Suddenly, John perceives a strange presence. His eyes dart around the dimly lit street, and without an explanation, he grabs Sarah and pulls her into a run. Sarah looks confused and doesn't understand why John is acting like that. They end up hiding in an alley. John reaches into one of their shopping bags. He pulls out a shirt and tosses it into the air. To their surprise, the shirt doesn't fall to the ground. It hovers, suspended in midair. "It's invisibility," John mutters, barely finishing his sentence before Sarah activates her power. The streets turn gray and time freezes. Moving forward with precision, she delivers a powerful kick to the space beneath the floating shirt before the world starts moving again. The guy flies away upon getting hit, and Sarah, looking noticeably drained, tells John to better get out of there. I wonder, where have we seen someone with an invisibility power? Outside of John's house, the streets are silent, shrouded in deep night, with no sound to be heard. John and Sarah return safely from the mall after their uncomfortable encounter with the invisible man. Sarah still can't wrap her head around what just happened. John dismisses it, suggesting it was probably someone trying to mug them, but he admits it was more than enough excitement for one day. Sarah watches John with a serious gaze, sensing something isn't quite right. Finally, she speaks, asking how he knew they were being followed. John waves it off, replying casually that it was just a gut feeling. Quickly changing the subject, he asks if she'd like to eat with him. Sarah declines the invitation, mentioning that it's pretty late and she should head back to her dorm. John reacts with alarm, clearly not expecting her to leave after what they had just experienced. Sarah remains stoic, assuring him that she can take care of herself. John reluctantly agrees, but insists she should stay the night, just in case. Sarah settles onto the sofa, her eyes falling on a lone book resting on the table. Its title reads, Unordinary, just like this manhwa. Ignoring John's questions from the kitchen, she picks up the book with quiet curiosity. John notices her holding it, a pinch of nervousness in his voice. Sarah asks how he managed to get his hands on a book that had been banned 2 years ago. John explains that his father gave him a copy since he had a few spares. Sarah reads the author's name on the cover and is surprised to learn that John's dad is the book's writer. She admits she's been interested in the book for a while, but since the ban, finding a copy has been nearly impossible. Curious, she wonders what made it so controversial that it vanished without a trace. John listens attentively, surprised at her level of interest in the topic. However, his expression darkens when she mentions rumors about the book being cursed, that readers, especially self-proclaimed superheroes, became delusional after reading it. John finally speaks, disagreeing with the notion that those superheroes were delusional. Instead, he argues, they understood the book's message. The world is flawed, and people should use their powers to bring balance and peace instead of serving selfish interests. With a faint smile, Sarah quips that he sounds like a vigilante. John finishes by inviting her to read it herself. Intrigued, Sarah decides to borrow the book. We find ourselves in an unknown location. A green screen displays a map with several marked positions. A mysterious voice asks for confirmation to mark the position of Target 93. Another voice approves the action. I wonder what they're planning. Meanwhile, back at John's house, both Sarah and John are asleep in the living room, but John seems troubled. His sleep is plagued by nightmares. Dark voices taunt him, calling him weak and easy prey. He screams at them to stop, begging to be left alone. Suddenly, the darkness dissipates, and a green-haired girl appears, offering her help. John wakes up abruptly, drenched in sweat and visibly shaken. He stumbles to the bathroom, splashing water on his face in an attempt to calm himself. It was just a dream, he mutters, trying to convince himself. Still restless, he decides to go out for a walk, hoping the cool night air will help clear his mind. He leaves without waking Sarah. His walk takes him to a convenience store, where he buys a few sandwiches. As he eats, the image of the green-haired girl resurfaces in his mind. With a bitter expression, he decides it's best to head back home. At the apartment, Sarah wakes up just as John returns. She notices him entering from the street and immediately asks if he couldn't sleep because of a bad dream. John brushes off her question, casually mentioning that he brought breakfast. Sarah's suspicion grows. John, usually talkative, hasn't said much since he came back. Directly, she asks, "Is everything all right?" John responds with a simple, "It's nothing." Sarah tries again, offering her support, but this time John snaps. He raises his voice, firmly stating that he's fine. That's all Sarah needs to hear. She rises from her seat and calmly tells him he needs some time alone. John tries to salvage the situation, but Sarah collects her shopping bags and leaves without another word, leaving John alone with his clouded thoughts. Outside, Sarah's phone buzzes. She glances at it and sees 37 unread messages waiting for her attention. It seems her phone had been in sleep mode. The scene shifts to the dormitories of Wellston School. A blue-haired girl notices Sarah entering the dorm and immediately approaches her. She looks both angry and worried, clearly upset that Sarah hasn't responded to her messages. Something about this girl feels familiar. The blue-haired girl scolds Sarah sternly for making her worry. What angers her even more, though, is the fact that Sarah was spending time with John. She starts yelling, questioning why someone of Sarah's status would ruin her image by associating with a cripple. Midway through her tirade, Sarah cuts her off. Now we learn that the girl's name is Elaine. Sarah activates her ability, freezing Elaine in place. With a calm but firm tone, Sarah reminds her that her choices and actions are none of Elaine's business. After heading to her room, time resumes, and Elaine collapses to the floor. Still dazed, Elaine receives a phone call asking if Sarah has returned. She confirms, though her frustration is evident. Back in her room, Sarah starts unpacking her shopping bags, including the teddy bear she won with John. Her phone buzzes. It's a message from John. He's apologizing for his behavior earlier and warning her to be cautious with the book. He reminds her it could cause serious trouble if anyone finds out she has it. Curious, Sarah opens the book and notices a handwritten note. Dedicated to my son. Before she can process it further, a sudden knock on the door startles her. She quickly hides the book and opens the door to find a familiar face. Arlo greets her, attempting a compliment, but Sarah quickly sees through his words and dismisses him. Undeterred, Arlo reveals his purpose. He wants Sarah to join him for a turf war since they're short a member. Sarah refuses outright. As she's about to close the door, Arlo stops her by reminding her of her duties as the rightful queen of the school. She glares at him and asks why Remy isn't handling it. Arlo explains that Remy had to step away for a while due to family issues. He continues trying to persuade her, promising that she won't have to lift a finger. He assures her that he and the Jack will handle everything, so there's no need for concern. 6 hours later, we see Sarah, Arlo, Blake, and Elaine on a bullet train, heading toward their turf war. The Wellston team arrives at their destination, a barren, deserted area. Their opponents are 4 ability users from Agwin School. As the Wellston team approaches, the Agwin students notice them. Arlo greets them with his usual smug confidence. However, the king of Agwin interrupts him, pointing out that since Arlo organized the turf war, they shouldn't have arrived late. This remark catches Sarah's attention. She recalls Arlo telling her that Agwin challenged them, not the other way around. Her suspicions grow as the 2 kings step forward to meet in the middle of the arena. The king of Agwin questions why they were challenged, pointing out that Wellston has no reason to provoke them. Arlo smirks and reveals his true intentions. Agwin recently gained a new queen, and he wants to see her in action. The rules of the turf war are announced. It will be a series of one-on-one battles. The king of Agwin turns to Sarah, unfamiliar with her presence, and asks Arlo who she is. Arlo nonchalantly introduces her as a returning veteran named Serafina. Hearing her name, the king of Agwin freezes, vivid memories of the past flooding his mind. He remembers Serafina as the unstoppable force who single-handedly took down his entire team in the past. While the Agwin king is lost in thought, Arlo seizes the moment to officially start the turf war. The Jacks from both schools step forward, ready to begin the first match. Agwin's Jack lunges at Blake with impressive speed. Blake steps back, keeping his distance and launching energy balls to hinder his opponent's movements. Agwin's Jack expertly evades by leaping into the air, aiming to close the gap. As he descends, Blake uses his energy beams to propel himself backward, narrowly avoiding the strike. Amid the debris, Blake fires a powerful energy beam at his rival. Agwin's Jack jumps to avoid the attack, but sustains an injury to his leg in the process. The Agwin king takes notice of the injury, and Blake, now irritated, presses the advantage. Agwin's Jack, realizing he needs to get close to stand a chance, hurls a rock at Blake. Blake destroys the rock midair with his energy balls, creating a thick cloud of dust. With visibility obscured, Blake seizes the moment. He appears beside his rival in a flash, charging an energy beam. The injured Jack knows he can't avoid the attack and braces for the worst. Just before Blake fires, the king of Agwin calls off the fight. Recognizing the futility of continuing, he declares their loss. Though humiliated, Agwin's Jack reluctantly accepts his leader's decision. The Queen of Agwin then steps forward confidently, announcing that she will handle the rest of the battle herself. Blake is declared the winner of the first encounter, but the battle is far from over. Agwin's queen steps forward, ready for the next match. As the fight begins, Blake launches a series of energy balls toward her, each one hitting its mark and kicking up a dense cloud of dust. When the dust settles, the queen's ability is revealed, a pair of spider-like claws protruding from her back, shielding her from the attack. Without hesitation, the claws lash out toward Blake. He skillfully evades, propelling himself with energy beams to maintain his distance. Despite his efforts, the relentless claws keep attacking, leaving him unable to approach. Frustrated, Blake attempts to maneuver closer, but two of the claws strike him directly, slashing deep wounds into his chest and leg. The queen smirks as a third and fourth claw emerge from her back, joining the fray. She launches a synchronized attack with all four claws. Blake narrowly evades, using a burst of energy to propel himself away. Finally, he closes the gap and prepares to counterattack. But just as he's about to unleash his power, a fifth claw pierces his side, halting his momentum. The queen uses her claws to hurl Blake across the battlefield, sending him tumbling to the ground. From the sidelines, Sarah glances at Arlo, wondering why he hasn't stopped the fight yet. Blake struggles to his feet. Despite his injuries, he tries to act tough and asks the girl, how many claws does she actually have? The queen dismisses his question with a bored expression and mentions that he probably won't be called back by his team until he gets knocked down. Growing impatient, the queen decides to end it. With all 5 claws, she launches a final, devastating attack. Just as the claws are about to strike, Sarah steps in and stops the fight. She declares the match over, handing the victory to Agwin School. Sarah turns to Elaine, instructing her to tend to Blake's injuries. She's been absent from turf wars for only 1 semester, and she can't believe Arlo has been managing them this way. She moves to step into the next battle, but Arlo blocks her path. With a confident smirk, he says, Blake and I are going to take care of this. Just sit back and watch. Agwin's king congratulates the queen but warns her not to let her guard down. He reminds her that Wellston is ranked #1 in turf wars, having never lost a fight. Agwin's queen tells him not to worry, saying she won't play anymore. The next match begins, this time between Wellston's king and Agwin's queen. The girl releases her 8 spider claws at once, launching them at Arlo. He remains still, creating a barrier to block the attack. The queen notices Arlo's strategy and decides to change her tactics. Using 4 of her claws, she leaps into the air, searching for a weak point before attacking again. Arlo blocks her effortlessly, not even breaking a sweat. The queen begins to notice cuts appearing all over her body. Arlo's barriers seem to deflect damage. She tries to increase the distance, launching more attacks, but Arlo steadily walks toward her, blocking every move. The injuries on her body continue to multiply, and she starts retreating. As she tries to back away, she discovers a barrier blocking her path. Arlo creates a cage-like barrier around her, trapping the queen like a spider in a glass. Every attempt she makes to escape results in more cuts. Arlo steps into the barrier, and she attacks again, but her claws are immediately blocked. Desperation takes over as she struggles to find a way to defeat him. Standing directly in front of her, Arlo calls her a disappointment. He mocks her, saying he'd heard so many good things about her but sees nothing special. Enraged, Agwin's queen tries to slap him, but she misses. Arlo grabs her hand and begins choking her. Agwin's king calls out to his queen, admitting defeat in the match. However, Arlo doesn't release her and continues mocking her attacks as weak. Agwin's king grows desperate, pleading for Arlo to stop, but he doesn't. Unable to watch any longer, Agwin's Jack rushes at Arlo, only to be immediately stopped by another barrier and end up full of scars. Arlo smiles at Agwin's king, knowing there's nothing they can do to save their teammate. But then, Sarah steps in and commands Arlo to stop. Arlo gazes at Sarah, thinking he won't take orders from someone who just returned to action. He tightens his grip on Agwin's queen. Sarah has seen enough. She activates her power. Elaine notices and tries to stop her, but time freezes before she can finish. Sarah rushes toward Arlo's barrier. With a powerful punch, she pierces through it. The attack reflects back, causing cuts to appear all over her arm. However, Sarah has another technique. She rewinds time, and her arm heals instantly. Arlo feels the pain from his barrier being pierced and releases Agwin's queen. Furious, he yells at Sarah, demanding to know what she was thinking, attacking her own teammate. Agwin's king lets out a soft laugh. He's never seen members of the same team fight each other. Sarah approaches Agwin's king and gives him two options. He can forfeit and accept his loss, or he can continue fighting, with her as his opponent. Agwin's king knows there's no point in continuing. He concedes defeat. On the way back to Wellston dorms, Elaine tends to Arlo, healing the damage caused by Sarah. Arlo asks Elaine why Serafina has been acting so strangely. Elaine admits she doesn't know. Nothing she says seems to get through to her anymore. Frustrated, Arlo asks what the point is of having Sarah as her roommate if she can't keep an eye on her. Elaine finally speaks. It's all because of John, she says. She explains that Serafina used to focus on being perfect until she started hanging out with John. Now, Sarah is completely different from the person everyone once idolized. Elaine adds that Sarah even stayed at John's place last night, which intrigues Arlo. He tells Elaine to keep a close eye on Sarah and report anything suspicious. As for John, Arlo plans to deal with him personally. John walks down the street when the news catches his attention. Another victim has been found, marked with the Ember logo. The victim, a vigilante, was found in the South Wellston area. John notices that the attacks are getting closer and closer. The news continues, revealing that those killed by Ember were known as high-tier vigilantes. They then show public opinions about the fallen vigilantes. Most people consider them lunatics who cause trouble and are just waiting to be killed. John keeps walking, ignoring the news. Back at Wellston, Blake is calmly heading to class when Ison sneaks up on him, giving him the scare of his life. Ison laughs upon seeing the scars all over Blake's face and asks if he got beaten up in the turf war. Blake retorts, saying at least he's strong enough to be in one. Ison responds, claiming he could be in a turf war too, but he's not into that stuff. Okay, dude, whatever you say. Blake mentions that Serafina was at the last turf war, which surprises Ison. Ison asks what happened, and Blake tells him that Serafina actually attacked Arlo. However, Blake stops mid-sentence, realizing he's not supposed to talk about it. Ison, sensing Blake is hiding something, says he'll feel better if he confesses and promises to keep it a secret. Meanwhile, John has returned to school, stressed, because he forgot he had a history exam. He bumps into Arlo in the aisle, still distracted. John apologizes, apparently unaware that Arlo is the king of Wellston. Arlo's classmate grabs John, demanding a proper apology. John, confused, wonders what the guy wants from him. Maybe he wants an apology too. He asks to be let go, explaining he has a test in 10 minutes. Arlo intervenes, telling his classmate to let John go. Arlo wishes John good luck on his exam, and John hurries off. Why do I feel like Arlo is about to do something? Arlo's classmate reminds him that John is the cripple Arlo was looking for. However, Arlo simply asks if his classmate noticed anything odd about John, to which the classmate denies. Arlo continues, asking what he would do if he were a weakling and bumped into the king. The classmate responds that, of course, he would be careful to avoid getting beaten up. Arlo thinks exactly the same. However, when John bumped into him, there was no sign of fear in his eyes. This attitude sparks a sense of curiosity in Arlo towards John. Meanwhile, on the school's rooftop, Sarah sits playing a game on her phone. Upon reading the word perfect, we dive into her memories. For as long as she can remember, she was taught to be perfect. Phrases like, "You are not like the others," "You were born gifted," and "You will rise above your peers" were constantly drilled into her. She had to be stronger and smarter than everyone else. She had to be perfect. But when perfection becomes an expectation, it's no longer an achievement. Sarah stopped living for herself. Her only role was to be perfect. We return to John and Sarah's first encounter. John, backed up against a wall, listens to his two bullies lecture him about hierarchy in Wellston until he notices Sarah. In his desperation, John calls out to her for help. The bullies laugh at him for not understanding his place. A weakling like him should never speak to the queen. One of the bullies gets frustrated by John's defiance and throws a punch. However, John manages to dodge it. At that moment, needles fired by the other bullies start hitting John. Sarah watches the scene unfold, and even she thinks two bullies against a cripple is overkill. Despite being a cripple, John avoids the bullies' punches and manages to land a knee to his stomach. John then uses the other bully's surprise to charge at him. He grabs him and tries to apply a hold, thinking he has a hostage to stop the other bully. But the other bully doesn't care and charges at John again. John, realizing his strategy failed, pushes his hostage toward the other bully and makes a run for it. As he's about to leave, John and Sarah lock eyes. John thanks her for not lifting a finger. Sarah is lost in her thoughts, still remembering the encounter with the cripple. The teacher calls her to collect her test, snapping her back into reality. A perfect score, as always. Her classmates voice their opinions aloud, saying that everything is too easy for her. However, they don't know that Sarah worked hard to be in this position. She walks down the aisle, hearing the expectations of other students, but they fall silent the moment they see her. In another aisle, two students mention that today they're serving the famous chocolate cake, and John can't wait to have a taste of it. In the cafeteria, John happily walks with a slice of chocolate cake in his hands. However, someone calls out to him. When he turns around, he sees Sarah again, but this time she's asking him to give her the slice of cake. John immediately refuses to follow the order. He doesn't care if she's the queen or whatever. He earned that slice and it belongs to him. Sarah extends her hand, her voice sharp as she threatens John, telling him not to make her repeat herself. John feels the weight of her presence. Nervously, he moves the cake toward her hand, but in his shaking state, he ends up dropping the cake. Sarah freezes for a second, trying to process what just happened. Her fury begins to boil, and she loses awareness of her surroundings. In a flash, she activates her powers and strikes John, sending him flying into a wall. She approaches him and gets down to his level. Snapping, she yells at him, complaining about how a cripple dares to humiliate her, someone who works hard every day. Her frustration keeps building. She slaps John, trying to understand how someone so weak acts as though he owns the place without understanding his position. At the end, it's not about the cake. She's angry because someone like John has more freedom than her. We return to the present, where Sarah is chatting with John about his failed exam. Serafina leaves the rooftop and hears the rumors about her fight with Arlo during the last turf war. It seems that Ison can't keep his mouth shut. Sarah continues to hear comments about her lack of respect for the rules and her appearance. But when the students notice her, the whole aisle falls into silence, and a smile creeps onto her face. For the first time, she feels truly happy, finally free from everyone's expectations. We are now at John's place. It seems that John was working out until somebody calls him. It ends up being his dad. Upon answering the call, his dad asks him how everything is going. You know, dad stuff. However, he also warns him to be careful since a group called Amber is causing trouble around his area. His dad really means it and tells John not to do anything stupid. I wonder what he means by that. The call ends faster than expected since John's dad's editor is calling him. At the Wellston dormitories, we see Sarah reading Unordinary, the book John lent her. She closes it and leaves it on the bed before heading out for a walk. When she's about to leave, she meets Elaine. Elaine cheerfully offers her a glass of orange juice made with fruit from her family's farm. Sarah accepts the offer, but says she'll have it later since she's about to leave. Sarah walks down the street thinking about the book's contents. It's a story about a man who protects a world full of cripples. How did someone come up with that premise? She wonders. She thinks John's father wrote the book to share his idea of a world where John could stand as everyone's equal. She recognizes that many people agree with that vision. That's why so many self-proclaimed heroes appeared, trying to emulate the hero of the book. It's no surprise the authorities banned the book since it goes against the structure of the current society. They feared how it inspired many high tiers to take action after reading it. But the world of the book and the real world share something in common. Only strong people have the power to influence reality. Back in Sarah's bedroom, we see Elaine leaving a glass of orange juice on Sarah's desk. As she turns to leave, she notices the book resting on the bed. Sarah returns from her walk and notices the orange juice on her table. She also notices the book on her bed and realizes she really messed up. On the other side of the bedroom, Elaine is researching the book. She finds a wiki about it and learns that the book is the reason so many vigilantes and self-proclaimed heroes started to appear. She continues her research and discovers several news articles about those superheroes being murdered. She gets frustrated because she doesn't know what to do and is scared that Serafina wants to become a vigilante. Elaine decides to call Arlo. Arlo picks up the phone, and Elaine tells him that Serafina is in big trouble. She explains that Sarah has a book called Unordinary and insists it can only mean bad news. Arlo tells her to calm down and stay focused. For now, he says it's better if no one else finds out about this. Back on the rooftop, John is talking to Sarah about his report card. From his attitude, we can infer that he failed almost everything. Sarah tells him not to freak out since there's nothing he can do about it. She then uses the moment to tell John that she cannot give him back the book. John immediately guesses that it must be because Elaine found it. From Sarah's expression, John realizes he's right. He reprimands her for being so careless and reminds her that, even with her ability, she can't rewind this mistake. John asks her what her plan is, and she replies that she'll keep the book for a while so no one can trace it back to him. Sarah tells John not to worry. Since she's the school's ace, she believes they will be lenient with her. John then asks her what she thought about the book. Sarah tells him that its content was absurd. However, she admits that some points are not fully clear to her and asks John for help. John starts by saying that he admires the hero of Unordinary because he listened to others and saw value in everyone. He continues, explaining that the core idea is that even the weakest people can have amazing ideas and they should be protected. With a proud light in his eyes, he says that if he were qualified, he would join the people trying to make that vision a reality. Sarah gazes at him and apologizes for the book, saying she didn't know it meant so much to him. John tells her it's okay since he has read it many times and needed a break from it anyway. In the library of the school, we find Blake reading a book. Everything is quiet until someone drops a mountain of books on the table. It's Remy, and she's upset about the number of exams she has to take at the end of the quarter. Blake is surprised. He didn't know Remy came back last night. Remy asks Blake to tell her if anything interesting happened last week. Blake mentions that they won a turf war, and he also adds that Sarah even substituted her as the queen. Blake is about to share something only royals should know. However, Remy interrupts him, saying everyone already knows that Sarah kicked Arlo's butt in the turf war. Remy is relieved that those two finally fought it out. However, she knows it's none of her business, despite Blake saying otherwise. Remy understands that her position as the queen is only because Sarah doesn't want it. She's aware that her level is far below theirs, and trying to stop them would probably get her killed. Blake then asks Remy why she left so suddenly. Remy's attitude changes and pain fills her eyes. She finally reveals she attended a funeral. Her brother was murdered. Meanwhile, we see John in his classroom. He looks really thoughtful. He starts remembering some kids laughing in front of him. A younger John, beaten and bruised, glares at them with fury. A hand extends toward him, offering help. It's the green-haired girl again. Suddenly, the teacher's voice snaps John back to reality. He stands up and collects his grade report, and it's not as bad as he was expecting. Elsewhere, Arlo is walking down one of the school aisles. He's surprised that Sarah managed to get a copy of Unordinary. He wonders if her recent behavior is influenced by the book. Suddenly, John bumps into Arlo, scattering all his papers. Arlo bends down to help him collect them, and the people around start murmuring. But when Arlo raises his voice, everyone goes silent. As Arlo leaves, he tells John to be more careful next time. However, his expression changes as he leaves, revealing that he's actually planning something. Now we find Arlo and Eason in an empty classroom. Eason is wondering why Arlo called for him. Arlo tells him that his expertise is needed and asks if he's able to find information on anyone. Eason asks what exactly Arlo is looking for. Arlo inquires if Eason knows John, who is in his grade. Eason affirms but wonders why Arlo is interested in that cripple. Arlo tells him that John looks suspicious after seeing him a couple of times. He's powerless, completely unaware of his surroundings, and has no respect for hierarchy. However, he got into Wellston and hangs out with Sarah. Arlo thinks those facts don't line up and asks Ison to find his story and what he did to get into Wellston. Ison tries to persuade Arlo to just forget about him. However, Arlo tells him he didn't ask for his opinion. Ison shakes a little and accepts the order. Before Ison leaves, Arlo reminds him to keep his mouth shut this time. Meanwhile, John is walking and notices a paper on the billboard. It's a death pool where students bet on which superhero will die next. This infuriates John, and he tears it off. With the paper in his hands, he wonders what kind of people would do that. Suddenly, he notices a bully stepping on another student's papers. The bully laughs, rejoicing in the panic of the victim. Out of nowhere, John launches a jab, throwing the bully to the floor. He lowers himself to the bully's level and starts lecturing him. John calls him a disgrace to society for stepping on people weaker than him. The bully only laughs and prepares to attack. He shoots a laser at John, but John doesn't flinch and avoids the attack. John has had enough and starts beating the bully. However, upon seeing the bully's face full of wounds, John's memory flashes back. He sees a blonde guy covered in scars. This makes him stop, and he decides to run away. The bully seizes the opportunity and starts threatening John, acting as though John is escaping from him. In the distance, Ison watches the scene carefully. Elsewhere in the school, we see Remy holding the death pool. Tears fall from her face as she uses her electricity to burn the paper. As she walks away, one piece of the burned paper shows the name X-Static. This vigilante was murdered recently and is probably Remy's brother. Remy is now knocking on Sarah's dorm. Elaine opens the door, and Remy tells her she wants to talk with Serafina. Elaine lets her in and offers some tea, but Remy refuses, saying the visit will be quick. Sarah is in her room, reading a magazine, when she hears Remy knocking on the door. Remy walks in and notices the teddy bear. However, she also spots a circuit inside of it. Immediately, Remy apologizes to Sarah and thanks her for substituting as queen during her absence. Sarah tells her not to worry, saying she owed it to her. After all, Remy had taken the burden of being queen off her shoulders. Remy keeps glancing at the bear, enough that Sarah asks why she's staring so much. Remy points out the chip inside the bear, saying it's giving her bad vibes. Curious, they open the bear and examine the circuit. It turns out to be a tracking device. This makes Sarah remember the moment she won the bear. She begins to wonder if all the prizes from the level gauge booth contained trackers. Her mind races back to the booth sign, which mentioned that anyone with an ability level of 5+ would receive a prize. She deduces that someone is tracking high tiers. Remy advises Sarah to stay alert from now on. Even though they're strong, they're far from invincible. Meanwhile, back at school, Ison is trying to process all the information he's gathered about John so far. He's spoken with bullies who had encounters with him, including Rockboy, and the pair who gave John his welcome to Wellston. He even tried asking the school doctor, but apparently the doctor didn't know any John. All the information points to John being just a typical cripple. Yet Ison can't shake what he saw during the confrontation with the bully. John didn't act like a typical cripple in a fight. He showed confidence. Frustrated by the lack of answers, Ison decides to talk directly to John. John is surprised to see Ison talking to a cripple like him. Ison mentions that the school newspaper wants to write an article about the life of a cripple and needs John's input to make it accurate. John shrugs and accepts, but says maybe later. His class is about to start. Ison, thinking John is joking, presses on saying that the interview can't wait. Ison takes John into a classroom and invites him to take a seat. John emphasizes that he was practically dragged there against his will. Ignoring the comment, Ison insists he sit. Ison explains that he's writing the article to bring attention to the struggles of low tiers and urges John to speak with full honesty, holding nothing back. John is surprised and happy at the comment, unaware of Ison's true intentions. The interview begins with Ison asking where John is from. John replies, New Boston, surprising Ison since it's quite far from the school. Ison then asks if that's where he went before transferring, but John corrects him, saying he was homeschooled and Wellston is his first real school. So, what made you switch? Ison asks. John explains that he was curious to see what a real school was like, but his dad had been a bit protective of him, which delayed his chance until now. Ison continues, asking how his experience at the school has been so far. John responds that it's been pretty bad, to say the least. When prompted to elaborate, John states that low tiers have no rights and must stay alert at all times since everywhere is a danger zone. John is surprised by how much Eisen is writing but doesn't realize that Eisen is actually doodling a silly scene of himself defeating Blake and impressing Remy. Eisen proceeds to ask how John manages to survive in such an environment. When John begins to answer, Eisen cuts him off, asking him to focus specifically on his own actions. John explains that he tries to walk on the edges of the hallways and stay quiet to avoid drawing attention to himself, though Eisen suspects he's lying. John eventually says the article should emphasize the importance of accepting people's differences. However, Eisen abruptly stands up, cutting John's speech short. Eisen reminds John that he still has many questions left to ask. He asks how John chose Wellston as his school. John replies that Wellston has one of the best academic programs in the nation. Feeling uneasy, John notices that the interview has shifted into more of an interrogation. Eisen comments that Wellston is also renowned for its high-tier abilities, making it a risky choice for a cripple like John. John admits that he assumed academics would be more valued than fighting, but Eisen dismisses this as short-sighted, although expected from someone inexperienced in such environments. Eisen then brings up John's father, striking a nerve. He asks if John's dad ever warned him about the challenges of the school. Eisen continues, suggesting that attending a closer school might have been a better first step instead of jumping into Wellston. He speculates that perhaps John's father had already tried that, but for some reason it didn't work out. John finally snaps. Grabbing Eisen by the shirt, he demands that he stop prying into his life. John reminds him that the purpose of the interview was to discuss his struggles as a low tier, not to be interrogated. With surprising strength, Eisen grabs John's arm and calmly remarks that John is very lucky to have Serafina on his side. Effortlessly, he removes John's hand from his shirt. Picking up his folder, Eisen thanks John for the information before leaving the empty classroom. It seems Eisen now plans to dig into John's past in New Boston. We find Eisen scrolling through pictures from New Boston High School. Suddenly, he spots John's picture among the files. Eisen abruptly stands from his chair, making a lot of noise and drawing attention. Blake, annoyed, tells him to keep it down to avoid getting kicked out of the library. Ignoring the comment, Eisen excitedly calls Blake over to show him his discovery. He points at John in the picture, but Blake looks confused, not even recognizing who John is. While Eisen keeps praising himself for uncovering something significant, Blake wonders why he should care about John. Frustrated, Blake asks why Eisen is stalking John. At this, Eisen suddenly remembers Arlo's strict warning to keep quiet. Snapping out of it, Eisen dismisses Blake's question with a curt, "That's none of your business," which irritates Blake further. Blake, who wasn't even interested at first, now feels insulted at being dragged into the matter, only to be dismissed. Later, Arlo and Eisen finally meet after some time apart. Arlo remarks that Eisen better have some valuable information after all this time. Confidently, Eisen takes out a file and begins his report. He explains that he's been observing John's behavior for several days, and John himself admitted that he was homeschooled and had no ability. Eisen notes that when John was asked about low tiers, he avoided speaking about himself, and his answers didn't align with his actual behavior. Initially, Eisen thought John was just clueless and acted that way out of ignorance. But when the topic of his past came up, John became extremely defensive and even attacked him. Eisen then presents Arlo with a picture of John and his class from 2 years ago. Arlo is surprised, remarking how unrecognizable John looks compared to now. Eisen continues, pointing out that John doesn't care if he bumps into someone and talks to high tiers without hesitation. He adds that if it weren't for John's claim of being a cripple, he would assume John had some kind of ability. Arlo listens intently, then surprises Eisen by tearing up the file he had just handed over. When Eisen offers to continue researching, Arlo stops him saying that he's done enough, and from that point he'll take care of John. Meanwhile, back at the Wellston dormitories, Elaine is doing some homework when her phone buzzes. She checks it and finds a new message from Arlo. Elaine seems happy as she picks up her phone, likely feeling something for Arlo. However, her expression darkens when Arlo asks her to inform the headmaster about what she found regarding Serafina. Later, over the school speaker, Sarah is called to the headmaster's office. Elaine waits outside the office, worried about what she's just done. Suddenly, the door opens, and Sarah appears, surprising Elaine. Sarah looks at her, but Elaine quickly avoids her gaze, feeling ashamed. Inside the office, Sarah is greeted by the headmaster, who invites her to sit. He asks her to relax, noting that even he's starting to feel nervous. Next, he introduces a woman present on behalf of the authorities. The headmaster tells Sarah that the woman is there to ask her a few simple questions. The interrogation begins, with the woman stressing that Sarah must be completely honest since any lie will be detected and could result in her expulsion from Wellston. The woman asks if Sarah has a book called Unordinary, to which Sarah replies affirmatively. "How long have you had the book?" the woman asks. Sarah answers that it's been about 12 days. Things begin to feel more serious as the woman asks how Sarah got the book. Sarah becomes nervous, not wanting to involve John. She starts analyzing the woman's power, and from her expression, she deduces that it must only be a lie detection ability, so her thoughts are safe. The woman, growing impatient, demands an answer. Sarah finally speaks, explaining that after leaving the mall, she felt like she was being followed by an invisible entity. After confronting it, she ran off with all her might. When she returned to her dormitory, the book was already in one of her shopping bags. The woman has been using her power while Sarah spoke and didn't detect any lies. She continues, asking if Sarah was with anyone when the incident happened. This question shakes Sarah once again. Before she can answer, the headmaster intervenes, stating that they should focus only on asking relevant questions, as their students' time is valuable. The woman presses on, asking where the book is now. Sarah responds that she destroyed it. "Did you read it?" the woman asks. Sarah answers yes. Finally, the woman asks what Sarah thought of the contents of the book. Sarah replies, saying that the message of the book was absurd. The woman seems relieved upon hearing that. She tells Sarah she can leave since she still needs to talk with the headmaster. Meanwhile, John is in class when his phone buzzes. It's a message from Sarah, asking him to meet her at the school gates. John rushes out and meets Sarah, who's carrying luggage. She explains that she was ratted out by Elaine and will have to leave the school for a month, heading back home. It seems the authorities were worried about the recent deaths of high tiers and wanted to ensure the book hadn't influenced her in any way. Sarah adds that John shouldn't worry because she managed to hide any trace of him from the lie detection woman. However, John scolds her for not taking the situation seriously. He tells her she should have told the truth, since the book was his. Sarah reassures him, saying the only thing that matters is that they both got through it relatively unscathed. John relaxes a little and ends up agreeing with Sarah. Sarah finally leaves, promising to text him once she gets home. John heads back into the school, unaware that Arlo is watching him with a menacing gaze. As John walks through the school, a familiar voice catches his attention. It's Rockboy again, still angry about their last encounter and eager to finish what he started with John. "Dude, you should really go to therapy or something." John rushes off, shouting that he's been mistaken for someone else. Rockboy chases him at full speed, while John tells him he shouldn't keep dwelling on the past and should just move on with his life. But John doesn't notice where he's heading, and soon finds himself at a dead end. Rockboy takes advantage of this, launching a powerful kick toward him. John manages to evade the kick, using the opportunity to push the bully and send him crashing to the ground. To make sure Rockboy stays down, John throws his notebooks at him before running off. John is running with all his might, knowing that if Rockboy catches up, he stands no chance. But in that moment, Rockboy leaps at him and grabs him from behind. Using his weight, Rockboy forces John to the ground and pins him there. With Sarah no longer around, Rockboy seizes the moment to take his revenge. In the infirmary, the doctor is surprised to see John back so soon. The doctor laughs, mentioning that it hasn't even been 4 hours yet, and John already has a black eye and a broken arm. He adds that he's in such a good mood because he had made a bet with another teacher about how long it would take John to break something, and he won. However, the doctor jokes that if John had taken longer, he would have strangled him himself. John rests on one of the infirmary beds, his phone buzzing beside him. He checks the screen. It's a message from Sarah. She tells him she just got off the plane, which brings a smile to his wounded face. After a while, John checks his arm and notices that it's completely healed. He compliments the doctor's tonics, saying they're getting better each time. With a menacing tone, the doctor thanks John for making him practice preparing the tonics every single day. John leaves the infirmary, his arm healed, but as he walks through the hall, 3 guys notice him. They start eyeing him with ill intentions. One of them, a purple-haired guy, shoves John against a wall, mocking his previously wounded appearance. The purple-haired guy mentions that there's a rumor going around school saying that Serafina has been suspended for a month. He then asks John to help them with target practice after school, since John clearly has nothing better to do. John notices a dark aura lurking just around the corner, and his attitude shifts immediately. He mocks the three guys, calling them weaklings who won't even be able to land a single hit on him. Irritated, the purple-haired guy demands that John watch his words. John, not caring, simply replies that the guy's breath reeks. Suddenly, a hand grabs the purple-haired bully, making him nervous. The doctor appears, threatening the bullies, mentioning that he has a date tonight. He warns them that if anyone makes him work overtime, he'll take care of them personally. John starts laughing softly, but the doctor's irritation grows. He adds that his threat applies to John as well. Finally, the doctor leaves, threatening them once more and saying he'll keep an eye on them. Once the doctor is out of sight, the purple-haired bully resumes his actions, calling John lucky for being saved by the doctor. He tells John that a cripple like him is nothing but a leech, feeding off others. The bullies finally leave, but John stands still, reflecting on what he just said. The words, "a leech who feeds off others," linger in his mind, making him think of the green-haired girl from his past. A dark expression settles on John's face as memories resurface. The scene shifts to Serafina's house. Upon arriving, Sarah greets her mother. Her mother simply calls her name from upstairs. In a flash, her mother comes down from the second floor and immediately slaps Sarah. It seems her mother possesses some sort of time manipulation ability as well. She scolds Sarah, warning that if she keeps becoming more reckless, she'll end up as the failure her older sister was. Her mother orders her to remove her extensions and says they'll discuss a proper punishment when she gets back. Sarah stays still, her cheek swelling from the slap as she hears her mother leave. Sarah is now in her room, using her laptop. Her phone buzzes, and upon checking, she sees a message from John asking if she has time to talk. John calls her, but when she picks up, he answers with an unusual "hi." Sarah mentions that he sounds weird. John explains that he was just surprised to hear her voice since it's been a while. Sarah jokes, asking if John already misses her. He laughs and replies that he just had a long day. Sarah starts helping John with some school assignments. She calls them easy, but John replies that they have very different definitions of easy. John asks how everything is going, assuming she's having a great time with her family. She stoically responds that it's almost the same since her parents left for a business trip. She's practically alone, playing video games all day. Sarah tells John she found a new game, but he better hurry with his homework so they can play together. John says he's just getting the hang of Slappy Pig, but Sarah replies it's a much easier game called Angry Pigs. She describes the game, which is similar to Angry Birds but with reversed roles. Instead of attacking pigs, the pigs attack the player, who must defend the birds by building structures. John ends up confused, unsure if the game is for him. They play together, but every one of John's attempts ends in a game over, which drives him crazy. He refuses to give up, but Sarah reminds him that he has school tomorrow, and it's already 2 a.m. The next day, John is walking through the school aisle, looking at his chat with Sarah on his phone. Suddenly, a hand stops him midway. It's Arlo, but he's not there to pick a fight. Instead, he reminds John to watch where he's walking. John simply replies with a sorry. Arlo is surprised since John doesn't seem affected. Then, he notices John's phone and the conversation with Sarah. They continue on their way. However, Arlo doesn't want John to keep talking to Sarah and plans to do something with John's phone. John is now being beaten up by a couple of bullies. They feel underwhelmed, expecting at least some resistance from him. After getting bored, they simply leave. In the infirmary, the doctor lists John's broken bones, surprised since John has broken his record. John responds, saying that this time he didn't start any fight. The bullies just appeared and attacked him, but the doctor cuts him off. He says he's tired and that by now, John should know how to avoid these situations. John tries to grab his phone, remembering that he hasn't texted Sarah yet. However, when he checks, he sees that his phone is completely broken. On the other side of the infirmary, the doctor is talking to Layla, the woman he had a date with. Suddenly, the doctor hears a crash and hangs up the phone. John has just smashed his phone against the floor, breaking it even more. He looks pissed and deduces that the bullies actually went after his phone. John gets ready to leave, but a hand holds his shoulder. The doctor tries to stop him, but John aggressively shakes him off. The doctor gets really angry, but before he can say anything, John speaks up. He says he didn't enroll at Wellston to spend all day in the infirmary. John is about to leave, but the doctor threatens him, telling him not to take one more step. The doctor asks what the point of leaving like that is. He'll only attract more problems in his state. John replies, saying the doctor shouldn't worry about him. The doctor responds, saying he's there to reduce injuries, and the only thing John will accomplish by leaving is causing him more trouble. The doctor finishes, telling him to sit down and rest if he has any respect for him. John reluctantly agrees. However, before sitting, he aggressively bumps into the doctor's shoulder. The doctor watches him, wondering why John is doing all of this to himself. John finally leaves the infirmary, looking all beaten up. Suddenly, he's pushed from behind, causing all of his papers to fall. He doesn't even try to respond. He just picks up his papers as the girls who pushed him call him a loser. Coincidentally, Blake and Remy are walking in the same aisle. Remy notices John and recognizes him as Serafina's friend. She also sees that John is covered in bruises. Remy approaches him and offers to help pick up his papers. Upon hearing Remy's offer, John's memories resurface, and he sees the green-haired girl instead of Remy. John snaps, yelling at Remy and swatting her hand away. Remy steps back, completely surprised by John's sudden shift in attitude. John is boiling with fury, but slowly he starts to realize what he just did to Remy. He mutters, trying to offer an apology. However, Blake shoots a laser before John can say anything. Blake approaches him, asking for a good reason not to destroy him right there. John tries to explain himself, saying he mistook Remy for someone else. Blake doesn't buy the explanation, but before he can do anything, Remy stops him, saying everything's fine and they should just let it go. They both leave, while John continues picking up his papers. Around him, everyone insults him, calling him a moron for pissing off the Queen and the Jack. John thinks about how he really admired the hero of Unordinary for seeing value in everyone, but now he finally snaps, calling the message of the book a lie. He now believes that none of them are worth anything. Back at John's house, Sarah is asking why he didn't text back. He explains that he got into a fight and his phone broke. Through the webcam, Sarah notices John's expression. She tries to cheer him up, telling him that phones are replaceable and he shouldn't let it get him down. She changes the topic, asking if he made any progress in Angry Pigs. John finally changes his serious expression, mentioning that he actually managed to beat some levels. This change draws a smile from Sarah. Back at Sarah's house, Sarah's mom finally arrives from her business trip. Upon arriving, she asks her servant how Serafina behaved during her absence. The servant replies that Serafina has changed her behavior. She spends all day locked in her room, only leaving for meals. The servant adds that she probably spends her time either playing video games or chatting with boys. Sarah is in her room, checking her laptop. She's having connection issues with a video game. She leaves her laptop and stands up to check if there's any problem with the router. But upon opening her door, she meets her mom outside. Her mom asks her to give her the phone and scolds her for wasting her time socializing and playing video games. She adds that Sarah is starting to behave like the disgrace of her sister. Sarah replies, mentioning that Layla never did anything wrong. That's the same name as the doctor's partner. Sarah's mom asks for the phone once more, and Sarah reluctantly obeys. Her mom finishes by saying that she turned off the Wi-Fi so Sarah could spend time thinking about her behavior without distractions. This annoys Sarah, since now she won't be able to talk with John. Back at John's house, he arrives tired and full of bruises from school. He immediately turns on his laptop, but notices that Sarah is offline. He decides to play some more Angry Pigs while he waits for Sarah. After a few failed attempts at the game, he notices that Sarah is still offline and wonders where she could be. At Wellston School, John is walking with his lunch on a tray. Suddenly, a bully calls him from behind, ready to make him lose all his food. John doesn't flinch and responds with an elbow to the bully's face. The bully looks defeated, his eyes starting to well up with tears, his nose probably broken. John glances at him with a stern expression, saying that he's not in the mood for his crap. John goes upstairs, leaving the bully on the floor. Upon opening the rooftop door, he notices that he's not alone. Arlo is standing there, likely waiting for John. John asks him what he's doing on the rooftop. Arlo glances at John's expression and notices that it's the same one from the picture Ison gave him from 2 years ago. Arlo replies, saying that he should be the one asking John the same thing. After all, the rooftop is an area only for royals, not commoners like him. John ignores his explanation, remarking that this is where he eats his lunch. He moves forward, ignoring Arlo's presence, and sits next to him. Arlo pretends to act patient, saying that John probably didn't hear him. However, John remarks again that that's where he sits. Arlo starts getting pissed at John's behavior and asks him if he's not afraid. John replies, mentioning that he sees no reason to be afraid. Arlo only laughs, mentioning that he could kick his ass in an instant. John agrees with Arlo but knows that he won't do anything. Curious, Arlo asks why he thinks that, to which John responds that only pathetic low tiers would go after a cripple. John adds that a king wouldn't gain anything from the encounter, but Arlo cuts him off with a single word: satisfaction. John proceeds to explain that there's no satisfaction in beating people much weaker than you. Arlo is surprised. How would someone like John know about that, unless he had some experience? Arlo bends down to get to John's level and tells him that there's someone completely useless, yet he talks back to him and dares to walk and sit in his place. He asks John, face to face, if you were king, what would you do about someone who's really ticking you off? John answers, saying that he should be grateful, surprising Arlo. He continues, saying that Arlo must be doing a great job since there's only one person he cannot keep in line. After all, a king is nothing if his subjects refuse to follow him. John stands after finishing his food and leaves. Arlo stays there, confused because he had no idea what John was talking about. Arlo thinks that only people who have stood at the top have that kind of confidence. He's now intrigued by the kind of person John was at his previous school. Back at Serafina's house, she's resting, lying on the bed until one servant approaches her. The servant tells her that the break is over and she has to return to her duties. Sarah sits on the bed and asks the servant what the book mountain is for. The servant answers that Sarah's parents want her to read through all of them and write a report by the end of the day. Sarah is annoyed, replying that she did the same thing last night. However, there's nothing the servant can do since those are the orders from Sarah's parents. Sarah is writing her essay, and she does not look happy. She remembers the last time she willingly worked so hard was a year ago. Slowly, exhaustion wins, and Sarah falls asleep. We go 1 year into the past. Sarah is thinking about why she behaved so aggressively toward the cripple. She wonders if John had anything that sparked that behavior. The teacher starts speaking and explains that there will be a project in pairs. Suddenly, the door of the classroom opens loudly, cutting off the teacher's speech. John apologizes and shows the teacher proof that he was in the infirmary. John approaches his seat, throwing an angry gaze towards Sarah. The teacher continues, explaining that each pair will have to make a presentation for each of the 3 books they will read. The teacher starts forming the pairs, and in an unexpected turn of events, she pairs John and Serafina together. This surprises them, but not in a good way. Now they are sitting together with gloomy expressions on their faces. Sarah tells John to move his elbow off her table, but John refuses. Before she can even start a threat, John cuts her off, saying that if she beats him up, he won't be able to help with the project. Sarah corrects him, mentioning that he won't touch the project. She continues, explaining that she will do the entire thing by herself, and at the end, she will give John some note cards for the presentation. John refuses to follow the plan. He argues that he went all the way to Wellston to learn. However, Sarah ignores John's words and stands up, cutting off his argument. She imposes her decision over John using her heavy presence. Without adding anything, she leaves the classroom while John looks at her with frustration. Sarah works diligently on the project while John dozes off and falls asleep on his desk. On the day of the presentation, Sarah approaches John and shows him the note cards. She tells him that he only needs to read them and follow her cues. John ignores her, and upon receiving the cards, he tears them. This exalts Sarah, who wonders what in the world he's doing. John tells her again that he came to Wellston to learn and not waste his time. He adds that since there was no communication between them, he made the whole project too, and so her notes are useless. He finishes by saying that they should at least try to figure out what to say during the presentation, to which Sarah reacts with anger. The teacher starts the class and tells everyone to get ready for the presentations. John and Sarah stand in front of the class, explaining the plot of a book called Hamlet. So far, everything goes smoothly, and now she gives John his turn to talk. She will give him one and only one opportunity. John starts giving more details about the book with confidence in his words. However, Sarah starts hearing things that are completely different from the actual plot. Sarah, frustrated, wonders if John even managed to read the latter half of the book. Sarah finally receives her grades, a B-. For her, that grade is a low blow to her image. But on the contrary, for John, it's a reason to celebrate. Sarah stands from her seat, and the teacher asks where she's going. Sarah replies, the library, while John watches her, wondering what's with her attitude. After class, John walks down an aisle and starts hearing the opinions of other students about Sarah. Practically all of them make fun of her for getting a B-. even adding that she's a disappointment. John listens attentively, thinking that even someone like Sarah has to go through these kinds of things. In the library, Sarah is checking some books until someone calls her. She lifts her gaze, only to find John. He asks her to work together this time so they do better in the next presentation. She aggressively stands from her chair and forces John against a wall. She tries to intimidate him, saying that if he doesn't follow her order to just read the note cards, she will send him to the infirmary every single day, giving him no chance to work on his project. John asks her if it's really worth going that far just for a perfect grade, to which she affirms. John asks again if she likes doing all the extra work by herself. He adds, wondering if the actual reason for her behavior is that she's constantly trying to impress people. This hits a nerve in Sarah, and she answers, saying that her attitude is none of his business. John strikes back, saying that he will continue doing his part of the presentation, and if he ends up wounded, she can consider the whole project a failure. Sarah does not hold back and promises to make John's life into a nightmare. With a sarcastic expression, John mentions that he's a cripple and there's nothing she can do to make his life more miserable. Sarah continues, stating that if John had followed her plan, they would have gotten an A without having to talk to each other. She's still furious, seeking an explanation for why he doesn't listen to what she says. "Because I don't want to," John replies, surprising Sarah. He adds that others' opinions mean nothing to him, even as a cripple. That is because before going to Wellston, John had already decided that he would live his life the way he wants. Sarah is shocked upon hearing John's answer, still with an angry expression all over her face. It is already night at the Wellston dormitories. Sarah lays on her bed, unable to sleep. Her thoughts kept circling back to John's words about whether all her effort was worth it just for grades and the approval of others. The idea that he could ignore others' opinions and live however he wanted struck her as absurd, almost delusional. The next day, Sarah went to the library to pick up some books. When she reached her usual table, she found John sitting there, working. Annoyed, she asked him why he was there, and he replied that he was working on the project. Sarah reminded him that he wasn't supposed to be doing anything, which only irritated him further. He insisted that he would do his part of the work regardless of her opinion. With reluctance, Sarah sat down, both of them silently resenting their partnership. As John finished a section of his work, Sarah requested to review it, arguing that it was reasonable given that they were supposed to be working together. John initially refused, but Sarah swiftly took the paper from him. Reading through it, she found several inaccuracies and questioned what was wrong with him. John defended himself by blaming the difficult language of the book, and Sarah told him to consult her if he had doubts instead of improvising again. They continued working on the project, but John eventually dozed off. Sarah slammed a book against the table, startling him awake, and ordered him to keep working, much to his frustration. After their second presentation, Sarah glared at her grades in disbelief. It was an A-, which felt like another failure to her. She couldn't understand why she kept falling short. In contrast, John was thrilled. Approaching Sarah, he celebrated their success, only for her to correct him coldly. She pointed out that the minus meant they had failed to meet expectations. Annoyed, John asked why she couldn't be satisfied with a good grade, but she ignored him, walking away and telling him not to speak to her again. As Sarah wandered through an aisle, she overheard laughter from nearby. Peering around a corner, she saw John being bullied by two girls. He was injured but still told them to stop gossiping and focus on themselves. One of the girls revealed they had been talking about Sarah, mocking her for her recent grades and calling her an embarrassment. Sarah froze in shock as she listened, but to her surprise, John defended her, stating that her dedication and hard work were undeniable. The bully responded by shoving John against the wall, mocking him for thinking his opinion mattered. Before things escalated further, Sarah stepped in. She grabbed the bully's face and slammed it against the wall, leaving John stunned. Holding the bully in place, Sarah turned her attention to the second girl, who immediately began to tremble. Terrified, the girl fled, abandoning her partner. The remaining bully turned to confront Sarah but stopped in fear upon recognizing her. Sarah demanded to know why she thought she could attack John and speak about her that way. The bully stammered an apology, claiming it was just a joke. Sarah ordered her to leave, and the girl ran off without hesitation. Once they were alone, John thanked Sarah. She dismissed his gratitude and stated they needed to start working on their third presentation. John, smiling weakly, responded that he would join her after a visit to the infirmary. Back in the library, John and Sarah were working on their project. Suddenly, John asked Sarah to help him understand a section of the text. Sarah smirked, mocking him, saying she never expected him to swallow his pride and ask for help. Despite her teasing, she began explaining the content of the book while John listened carefully. She found herself surprised by his attentiveness, as he had been uncharacteristically diligent over the last few days. The day of the final presentation arrived. Before it began, the teacher asked the groups to have a brief discussion. Sarah noticed John's worried expression and couldn't resist teasing him. She joked that he would drill a hole in the floor if he kept staring like that. John admitted that he truly wanted to do his best this time. He explained that he disliked what people said about Serafina and didn't want to drag her down any longer. Sarah responded curtly, telling him it was a little late to be worrying about that. When John apologized, she brushed it off, telling him to forget about the past and focus on the present. When it was their turn, Sarah stood and made an unexpected remark to John. She told him that he had been the most persistent partner she had ever worked with. Her comment caught John off guard, but brought a smile to his face. The presentation went smoothly, far better than their previous 2 attempts. Afterward, Sarah received her grade, a solid A. She finally felt at ease, though she refrained from celebrating. Approaching John, she noticed the joy radiating from his face. John, unable to contain his excitement, jumped out of his seat, celebrating their achievement. He enthusiastically told Sarah that she must be happy about her grade now. Then, with a grin, he invited her to celebrate with drinks on him. Sarah maintained her stoic demeanor, reminding him that his average grade was still an A-. John disagreed, arguing that they had worked hard for this and deserved a reward. Sarah initially refused, stating that she would rather spend time in the library. However, John was relentless and eventually convinced her to join him. They ended up at a boba tea shop. As they sipped their drinks, they both found themselves genuinely enjoying the moment. Though Sarah didn't show it outwardly, she too wanted to celebrate. She silently thanked John for teaching her to focus on what made her happy. Back in the present, Sarah was asleep at her desk. A servant entered the room, waking her up. The servant informed her that she was there to collect her work. Sarah groggily replied that it wasn't finished yet. The servant then mentioned that Sarah's father had arranged an internship interview for her at NXGen Research Facility. The interview was scheduled for the next day, and the servant advised her to research the company beforehand. Sarah sighed, commenting on how short the notice was. The servant, unimpressed, questioned whether her time away from home had made her soft, noting that she had been complaining more about her responsibilities. Before leaving, the servant reminded her to work more efficiently. Sarah stayed at her desk, staring at her unfinished essay with a sense of frustration and helplessness. John walked home, weighed down by the monotony of his routine. Wake up, go to school, get beaten up, and come back with nothing to look forward to. He couldn't help but wonder why he had to endure it all, questioning the point of the endless cycle. When he arrived home, he let his jacket and bag fall to the floor without a second thought. Frustration boiled over, and he lashed out with a powerful kick at the punching bag in the corner. The bag swayed violently, but it wasn't enough. He began throwing punch after punch, venting his anger on the worn leather. Everyone felt worthless to him. The weaklings who couldn't stand up for themselves and the so-called elites who only used their power for selfish and petty reasons. He was sick of people who thought they could do whatever they wanted simply because they had power. The image of the green-haired girl flashed in his mind. Someone he had once believed in, and now even she seemed like a disappointment. His strikes intensified, fists slamming into the bag until his knuckles burned. His breath came in raged gasps as he came to the bitter conclusion that everyone around him was worthless. But then a memory of Sarah surfaced, interrupting the storm inside him. Her image lingered in his mind and he began to relax, the anger dissipating as quickly as it had surged. His hands were raw and bloodied, trembling from the effort, and he finally collapsed onto the floor. Eventually, he sat up and turned to his laptop, scanning the screen for any sign of Sarah. She was still offline, and the silence gnawed at him. It had been a week since he'd last heard from her. He noticed that his dad was online and decided to call. His dad was surprised to hear from him through the laptop, and John explained he had broken his phone in an accident on the stairs. His dad brushed it off, promising to send him money for a new one. John shifted the topic, asking if his dad could send him another copy of Unordinary, but his dad's tone grew serious. He explained that the editor had destroyed all the copies for his own safety. Concerned, his dad asked if everything was all right, but John quickly dismissed the question, claiming he had a lot of homework and ending the call before his dad could say goodbye. When his dad called back, John ignored it and closed his laptop. Back at school, Eason was keeping an eye on John, unsure of what Arlo was planning but recognizing that it was working. Slowly but surely, John's true colors were beginning to emerge. We are now at the headmaster's office. A blonde guy is knocking on the door and the headmaster invites him in. This guy, called Keen, is the head of security at Wellston. The headmaster invites him to sit and watch the news. The news is talking again about the group Ember. A new body has been found with its mark, and this time, it's in the town of Wellston. The headmaster asks Keen what he thinks about these news reports. Keen answers that it is frightening to see high tiers being murdered. He adds that it is pretty hard to understand Ember's objective. The headmaster asks him if he remembers Ray, the former king of Wellston. Of course, Keen remembers. Ray was a brilliant student with immense potential and a powerful electricity ability. The headmaster reveals that Ray was murdered by Ember a month ago, leaving Keen perplexed. He does not understand how that was possible. The headmaster explains that it might be linked to the fact that Ray got his hands on a copy of Unordinary. Keen is still shocked, considering that Ember must have strong members capable of taking down high tiers like Ray. The headmaster instructs Keen to monitor everyone entering the school until the situation with Ember is resolved. He adds that, combined with the reason behind Seraphina's suspension, Wellston now has 2 incidents related to Unordinary. This means the authorities will be keeping a close eye on them. The headmaster continues, asking Keen to bring any suspicious individuals to him for questioning. He also requests that Keen try to keep the authorities away from the school's internal matters. In another part of the school, a blue-haired guy is walking down the aisle. He spots Eisen and immediately hides, wondering what Eisen is doing. Around the corner, Eisen is watching a scene between John and 4 bullies. One of the bullies is pushing John against the wall. John asks him to stop touching him, making the bully and his crew laugh. The bully reminds John that he's the strongest there, so he can do whatever he wants. As he says this, the bully lunges at John with a jab. John swiftly evades the hit and grabs the bully's arm. Using the bully's momentum, John brings him to the floor, applying pressure on his elbow from behind. John, tired of the bullying, yells at him, telling him to never touch him again. While yelling, John increases the force on the bully's elbow, breaking it. The bully's 3 partners launch themselves at John, using their abilities. John stands his ground, ready for the impact. His eyes begin to release a yellow glow, revealing that John actually has an ability. John stands up, his eyes still glowing yellow. Suddenly, his mind recreates a similar scene from his past. He sees himself at his previous school, surrounded by defeated guys. Among them is a green-haired girl looking completely defeated in the background. A younger John stands triumphant in a deserted area, facing the green-haired girl. He tells her if she really thought he would be defeated just because she gathered a bunch of weaklings. John calls her Claire and adds that he expected more foresight from her. Apparently, Claire had known long before they met that John would become king of the school. She looks at John with fury, but he continues speaking. He asks if the only reason she helped him was to improve her position. Claire remains silent, breaking John's patience. He grabs her by the hair, demanding an answer. He asks why she made everyone turn against him. Claire yells back, telling John to look at himself. John looks confused, and Claire seizes the moment to free herself from his grasp. She slaps him hard across the face. Yelling at him, she tells him to take a good look at the kind of monster he has become. She says he only looks for reasons to hurt people and cares for no one but himself. Claire calls him a tyrant and a hypocrite, declaring that he does not deserve the power he has. She wishes she had never helped or met him. This breaks John, and he yells at her to shut up. Claire defies him, daring him to silence her with violence, just like he did with everyone else. John grabs her shirt and prepares to punch her, screaming at her in rage. But before the impact, he notices her expression. Her face is filled with fury and deep disappointment. Claire calls him a monster before falling unconscious from his punch. John snaps back to the present. His body relaxes, and he decides not to use his ability. Once again, he remembers Claire's voice calling him a monster. By the look on his face, it is clear that this memory has left a wound he still cannot heal. The bullies are still rushing at John, and one of the girls launches the first attack. John manages to block it, but his arm is on the verge of giving out. Using his other arm, he throws a direct punch to the girl's stomach. The other guy launches energy missiles, but John dodges them. He tries to formulate a plan to escape, and concludes that the best way is to take down the guy blocking the exit. Before he can act, the second girl approaches from behind and lands a hit on John's neck. The first bully follows up with a punch using his fully healed arm. From above, the first girl joins her hands and delivers a devastating attack to John's back. He collapses to the floor, bleeding, but the bullies don't stop. The first girl grabs John's head while the first bully prepares to continue the beating. The bully starts lecturing John, but John begins to lose consciousness and doesn't hear anything he says. This enrages the girl holding John's head, and she prepares to hit him again. Just as her punch is about to land, a barrier appears, reflecting the damage. Her arm bleeds heavily from the backlash. The second girl rushes over, asking what happened. She freezes upon realizing that her friend was stopped by Arlo's barrier. Arlo stands nearby, silently observing the scene. He approaches John while the bullies stammer, trying to explain themselves. Without a word, Arlo traps the bully leader in a barrier. The barrier starts shrinking, forcing the bully to bend over to avoid being crushed. Arlo places a foot on him and demands, "Who gave you permission to talk?" He then helps John to his feet. As they walk away, Arlo mentions noticing John's glowing eyes. He wonders why John prefers to be beaten, instead of using his power to fight back. We are now at the infirmary. Arlo is sitting next to John's bed, reading the school newspaper. He's focused on an article written by Ison about Ember. Arlo waits patiently for John to wake up. Meanwhile, John seems to be having a nightmare about his past. In his dream, young John is sitting on the rooftop of his previous school. Suddenly, a blonde guy named Adrian approaches him, visibly scared. Adrian stutters nervously, struggling to speak. John grabs him and demands he get to the point. Adrian says there's an issue with Claire. He overheard her talking to the Jack about her true motives for approaching John when he was still weak. Apparently, she only wanted John to rely on her blindly once he reached the top. John doesn't believe a word and smacks Adrian, calling him a liar. He refuses to accept that everything he experienced with Claire could be a lie. Adrian insists that Claire has been using him all along and is now gathering people to dethrone him. John hits him again and yells at him to shut up. He dismisses Adrian's words as nonsense and says they carry no weight compared to Claire's. Adrian doesn't back down, and he tells John that his ego is blinding him. Adrian warns that if John doesn't open his eyes to what's happening, he'll lose everything. John laughs mockingly and asks if Adrian has forgotten how powerful he is. He yells, declaring he will never lose because everyone else is trash. John abruptly wakes up in the infirmary. Upon seeing Arlo, he immediately throws a punch at him. However, Arlo doesn't flinch, as if John's punch had no effect. John grabs Arlo's shirt in frustration. Irritated, he demands to know why Arlo helped him and what he's planning. Arlo remains stoic and reminds John that not everything revolves around him. He advises John to wake up from his delusional world and remember who he just hit. Arlo warns John that he's lucky he's patient. Standing in front of him, Arlo coldly states that he deeply despises people who refuse to learn their place. He adds that if John ever touches him again, he won't be so lenient. Arlo leaves the infirmary, and John stays behind. He sits there, questioning the point of everything he's doing. Arlo leaves the infirmary and his phone buzzes. It's a mysterious message that says that Ison has been following him. In another aisle, Ison is trying to process the scene he just saw. He saw the glow in John's eyes and Arlo saving him, so probably he also knows about it. Out of nowhere, Arlo appears just around the corner, surprising Ison, who gets ready to escape. However, Arlo calls him, saying that he's the person he was looking for. Arlo tells Ison that he knows that he's still spying on John. Ison tries to deny it, but Arlo cuts him off, saying that he can't hide it from him. After all, Ison is doing all of that because he wants a top story for the newspaper. Arlo then offers him a deal. Serafina comes back in 2 weeks, and Ison will have that time to make his article and keep Arlo informed about everything he discovers. If he accomplishes it, Arlo guarantees him the front-page article of the school's newspaper. Upon hearing that, Ison happily agrees. But when Arlo leaves, he realizes the kind of job he just accepted. In the Wellston boys' dormitories, Ison is looking for more info about John on his laptop. He finally gets a huge discovery, John's transcript from his old school. He's about to check its contents, but suddenly Blake appears behind him, congratulating him for the top story in the newspaper. Ison gets scared, immediately covering the screen of his laptop to hide his research. However, Blake spots John's face on the screen and asks Ison why he is so obsessed with John. He adds that he's a lunatic since Remy tried to help him, but he yelled and slapped her. Blake says that instead of worrying about John, Ison should spend more time with Remy. After all, since Ray passed away, Remy has not been the same. Ison proposes to take Remy out to the mall or something to relax her mind. Blake thinks it's a good idea and will tell Remy and leaves, mentioning that Ison better not bail them this time. Ison resumes his research, but his expression changes when he reads about John's power and level. He now understands how John got into Wellston and his high level of confidence. The report says that John was expelled from New Boston 2 years ago, but Ison recalls that John got into Wellston last year, and now he wonders what John did during that year in between. Ison now starts reading the reason behind John's expulsion. Excessive violence, it says. Upon checking more details, Ison can't believe what he's reading. Apparently, John was able to single-handedly take down half his class for an unexplained reason. Ison gets nervous. John is not someone to mess with and wonders what would happen if they expose him. Back to the rooftop of the school, we find Arlo. Suddenly, John opens the door and enters. Arlo mentions that he must be very brave to appear here again. John apologizes and mentions that he really wanted to talk with him. John promises that it won't take long. Arlo allows him to stay and asks him what he wants. Before John answers, he prepares to sit, but Arlo stops him, saying that he'd better hurry and say what he needs to say. John starts by thanking Arlo for saving him earlier and apologizes for punching him after waking up. Arlo asks if he came all the way up there to waste his time with a corny speech. John says that he didn't want Arlo to get the wrong idea. He appreciates the fact that a person helps someone like him. Arlo clarifies that he didn't help John because he wanted a new best friend. Instead, he hates people breaking the hierarchy. He considers that 4 people against only 1 guy is not how order works, and it should be a fair one-on-one. After all, if John had fought each one of the bullies separately, he would have a chance to win. John dismisses it, saying that Arlo is giving too much credit to a cripple like him. John finishes, saying that's all he wanted to say, and hurries off. Arlo thinks that John is a liar, and the fact that he oversells himself as a cripple makes him wonder why he's denying his place. It looks like John is trying to convince himself that he's completely powerless. In another part of the school, Ison is reviewing the information about John's expulsion. He concludes that it was not because he took down half his class, but because the school was not able to control him. Ison thinks that it's better to leave John minding his business, and the best way to do so is to make Arlo forget about it. Suddenly, Arlo's hand appears on his shoulder, scaring Ison. He tries to escape, saying that he's busy, but Arlo creates a barrier blocking his way. Arlo tells him to not even think about running, and that there must be a good reason for ignoring his calls. Ison says that he was not able to find anything, but Arlo does not buy it. Arlo knows that someone able to get information about the Ember organization wouldn't fail at finding basic information about one of his classmates. Being too good at your job was your ruin, dude. Arlo tells him to reveal the information if he still wants a successful story. However, Ison says that he'll drop the story, surprising Arlo. Ison reveals that the best course of action is to wait for Serafina to return and to pretend that his investigation never happened. He continues, saying that everything is good the way it is. However, Arlo replies that John is not in his rightful place. Without thinking, Ison replies that it's not Arlo's business. Arlo smacks Ison against the barrier and reminds him that he decides everything at school and demands Ison to reveal everything. Even in that situation, Ison does not reveal anything. He's afraid of what John could do if Arlo tries to force him. Arlo releases him, surprising Ison. However, Arlo says that all his time won't go to waste and he personally will get to the bottom of this. Arlo leaves, ignoring Ison's warnings and his begs for him to stop since he's not aware of what he's dragging everyone into. John is walking down the aisle of the school, remembering Arlo's words about being able to win against the bullies. He looks thoughtful but thinks he doesn't want to get involved in hierarchy. He never wants to go back to that time, where hierarchy only brought pain and anger to his life. John keeps walking, and in the corner, he crashes again with Arlo dropping his papers. Arlo doesn't even get surprised. At this point, he's used to that. John bends down to pick up his papers, and Arlo watches him from above, angry for seeing John acting so pathetic, even with the potential of a high tier. Arlo drops a binder to the floor and tells him to use it to avoid embarrassing himself every time he bumps into someone. Arlo is about to leave, but John tells him that he just can't take his stuff. Arlo gets even angrier, but just tells him to keep the binder. John insists that he has to pay him in some way and asks him if he's free after school. They end up going to the same boba store that John and Sarah frequent. John asks if Arlo has ever had boba, to which he replies with a no. John then advises him to order a mango boba, and Arlo agrees. The waitress arrives and asks them for their order. Arlo starts by ordering a large coffee, surprising John since there's no point in ordering coffee in a boba store. John then tells the waitress to bring 2 mango drinks instead, but Arlo refuses and orders his coffee again. John insists again, saying he's the one paying. However, Arlo does not care and orders a coffee on a separate tab. On the TV, the news are talking about NX-Gen Research, the company that interviewed Sarah. They explain that it is a lab where they research the root of their abilities, and a huge secret project was put on hold. Back at the table, Arlo is drinking his coffee, and John is by him, not wanting to taste the boba drink. John tells Arlo that he reminds him a lot of Sarah when they first met. Arlo asks him how he ended up being so close with Sarah. John starts saying that they hated each other at first because she beat him up, and then started talking and hanging out due to being stuck together on a project. At the end, she saved him from some bullies, and their friendship slowly began. Arlo then asks him where he learned to fight, since not many low tiers are able to go against mid tiers. John replies that his dad taught him as long as he can remember since he wanted his son to be able to defend himself. Arlo asks if John's dad is also a cripple, and he confirms. John adds that he's very proud of his dad, even with people looking down on him. He's able to do his best with what he has. John then asks if Arlo has someone he looks up to. Arlo answers, saying Ray, his predecessor as king. Arlo says that he didn't agree with the way he managed things, but despite that, it was hard to dislike him since he was really good at recognizing people's talents and was extremely powerful. He finishes by saying that if he were alive, he wouldn't know who is stronger. John does not understand what he means by that, but Arlo stands up. He leaves the money for the coffee on the table and leaves, saying that he has some things to take care of. Before leaving, John insists one last time for him to take the mango drink with him. In Serafina's house, she's working on her daily book report. However, at this point, she's tired of doing that and throws the book with fury. Without noticing, the servant appears to inform her that NX-Gen turned down Sarah's application. The servant adds that Sarah's father is very displeased and wants her to try harder next time. Back at the Wellston dorms, Blake and Ison are waiting for Remy. Apparently, they are planning to go to the cinema, but Blake, upon seeing the tickets, tells Ison he should have picked an action movie instead. Ison says that he's wrong since girls are into romantic stuff. Suddenly, Remy calls them from behind and says that she's ready to go to the mall. In a store, Ison is having an internal argument about which pen to choose, one with a gel grip or with a titanium grip. In the background, Remy is playing with a ball and suddenly launches one at Blake's face, imitating his attacks. They start a ball war while Ison takes an eternity to choose the pen. Tired of waiting, they throw a ball at Ison's head, telling him that it's getting late for the movie. In the cinema, the three are watching the movie, invested in its development to the point of releasing tears. After the movie, Ison mocks Blake, saying that despite not wanting to see the movie, he ended up crying. Suddenly, Blake spots an ability gauge booth, the same one where Sarah and John went. Knowing that Remy has a level higher than 5, they decide to make her participate. Ison practically drags Remy to the booth and Blake pays, telling the vendor to measure Remy's ability. Remy says that she already knows her level, and Ison replies that it's a guaranteed prize then. The vendor tells Remy not to worry, and he starts measuring her powers. The vendor gets surprised. Remy is very powerful for getting a 5. The vendor looks for a prize and gives her exactly the same teddy bear that Sarah received some time ago. Upon seeing the bear, Remy gets nervous and grabs the bear. After opening the bear, she takes out the tracking chip. This puts Blake and Ison on alert, including the vendor. They don't look happy, and Remy asks what the meaning behind the chip is. The vendor tries to calm the situation, mentioning that he's as surprised as they are and he's only giving the prizes his boss gave him. While grabbing the vendor's arm, Ison activates his ability. It is some sort of scan ability that allows him to check the pulse of the vendor. By his heart rate, Ison concludes that the vendor is lying. Ison hardens his grip, telling the vendor that he'll have to come with them. With no way to escape, the vendor drops a gas bomb, filling the area with a thick cloud of smoke. In the middle of the smoke, a guy with an invisibility power approaches the vendor from behind, making him also invisible. Remy tells Blake to get rid of the smoke. Blake charges energy balls on his hands and collides them, making an expansion wave that disperses the smoke. Upon checking the booth, they notice that the vendor is gone. However, they don't worry since Ison's ability also allows him to lock people's positions. With that, he's able to spot the vendor even if he's invisible and tells Remy where the vendor is heading. They rush to the exit, making a lot of fuss and alerting one of the mall guards. Upon seeing them, the guard mistakenly thinks that Blake, Remy, and Ison were the ones that set off the bomb and calls for reinforcements. Outside of the mall, they spot the vendor on a motorcycle still being invisible. Ison rushes to follow them, but doesn't notice that a truck is about to hit him. Thankfully, he's able to stop the car with his ability. Blake gets over the truck while mocking Ison for not looking both sides while crossing the street. Then Blake yells at Remy, telling her that he'll back her up. Remy uses her electricity power to increase her speed and follows the bike. However, when Blake is about to make the shot, one of the guards stops them, making them unable to continue the chase. Remy is approaching the bike but wonders why Blake hasn't shot an energy beam yet. Eventually, Remy's range reaches the bike, and she uses her electricity to stop it. The two riders crash to the floor, clearly injured. When Remy is about to get close to start the interrogation, a female guard launches at Remy out of nowhere. However, Remy was covering her body with electricity and unintentionally ends up zapping the guard, making her unconscious. When Remy turns to check on the riders of the bike, she doesn't find them. Remy decides to concentrate to feel any of their electronics. However, the guard grabs Remy's leg with the little force she has left, making a complete halt to the chase. In the security room of the mall, we see the female guard escorting Remy using handcuffs. Ison and Blake are already there, trying to explain to the other guard what actually happened. Blake tells the guard to check the camera footage from earlier to verify that they are not lying. The guard adds that the vendor always gave him bad vibes. But honestly, the guard only started to listen to them after he discovered that they were students from Wellston. The guard says that he'll check the cameras, but they better not do anything funny. However, upon turning, Blake and Ison disobey his orders. While they wait, Ison mentions that he could easily get free from the cuffs, but Blake cuts him off, not wanting to get into more trouble. Remy says that the cuffs were not designed for people like them, and Ison asks, "What's the point then?" Remy continues, asking them why they let the guards catch them if they were stronger. Ison replies that he didn't want to get into trouble, and Blake says that the authorities were backing the guards. Remy says that that's the point. The cuffs are for mid-tiers, but for people like them, they act as a reminder that there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. They might be strong, but the authorities will always stop them. In the camera room, the guard is checking the footage. The students were not lying, but due to the smoke, the camera did not record much. However, at the booth, they notice a hooded man picking up the teddy bears and taking them out of the mall. The guard tries to follow him, but the hooded man managed to avoid all the cameras while leaving. Back to the security room, Remy tells the guys that she accidentally zapped the female guard, and she had to help her cuff herself. She starts daydreaming about how many guards it would have taken to stop her if she wanted to keep chasing the vendor. However, Remy stops, and her attitude changes. She tells them that she's been thinking about how the authorities would deal with powerful people like Sarah or Arlo if they decided to challenge them. For her, it wouldn't be logical to let people that powerful roam free without some kind of condition. She suspects that they actually don't have as much freedom as they think. Blake dismisses it, saying that they can do whatever they want at school, even not going to classes. However, Remy says that that's the case, but they also seem very obsessive. For example, Sarah and her obsession with perfection, and Arlo with his obsession for order. They are so invested in their responsibilities that the idea of defying the authorities never crosses their mind. Remy adds that it looks like they've been crippled. This automatically makes Ison remember John's past and his change of attitude. Ison then adds that it sounds logical. After all, the authorities need a reliable way to keep strong people in line. Blake is still not sure and asks about the superheroes not being targeted by the authorities. Ison calls him dumb for not being aware of the recent news. Ison explains that those superheroes don't act according to the authorities' wishes, and out of nowhere, a group called Ember appears and starts killing them. Blake gets shocked but still finds it hard to believe, despite Ison saying that there is no choice but to get rid of a threat that can't be controlled. Ison turns to Remy, revealing that she asked him to write an article about Ember for the front page of the school's newspaper. Remy wanted the students to be more wary about Ember's existence and to slowly introduce the idea that Ember and the authorities are connected. Suddenly, the guard appears telling them that the three are clear. However, the case was escalated to the authorities, so they need them to give an official statement, which annoys them. At Serafina's house, she's working on her assignments late into the night. Suddenly, a pile of books crashes onto her table. The servant explains that it's the work her dad assigned her for the night. The servant says she'll return in the morning to collect the assignments and warns Sarah not to disappoint her parents again. As soon as the servant leaves, Sarah shoves all the books off the table in frustration. Standing amidst the mess, she sees John's image flash through her mind. Even as a cripple, John fights, bluffs, or escapes from his challenges. So, what's stopping her from breaking free of her own situation? Morning arrives, and while Sarah checks her laptop, the servant reappears to collect the assignment. Sarah tells her she hasn't touched the books and won't be giving her anything. The servant warns her of the consequences if her mother finds out, but Sarah interrupts. She declares she'll speak directly to her mother. When Sarah moves to leave her room, the servant tries to stop her and insists on delivering the message herself. Sarah freezes time, leaving the servant immobilized, and heads to her mother's room. Standing outside the door, she feels nervous but reminds herself that if John can stand up for himself, so can she. She opens the door and finds her mom reading documents. Her mother looks up and immediately critiques her appearance, telling her to remove her extensions and fix her jacket. Sarah begins by saying she won't do the assignments anymore, startling her mom. She continues, saying she wants the freedom to walk through the house and dress how she likes. Her mom cuts her off, insisting that instead of complaining, Sarah should be grateful for her privileges. She reminds Sarah that her path to success has been carefully laid out for her. Her mom warns her not to end up like her older sister, a failure. Sarah counters, saying she finally understands why Layla ran away. The house is cold and lifeless, and her sister was tired of being treated as a disappointment. Sarah accuses her mom of refusing to acknowledge how her actions caused everything to fall apart. Enraged, her mother activates her power to freeze Sarah in place and moves to slap her. But before the slap lands, Sarah activates her own power, nullifying her mom's ability. Her mom is shocked and demands to know how she did it. Sarah smirks and replies that she's simply faster. Sarah then uses her power again, freezing her mother. Her mom demands she stop, but Sarah ignores her and states her terms. She wants a ticket to Wellston by tomorrow because she refuses to stay another day in the house. She also demands her phone and credit cards be reactivated since she'll be packing that night. Her mother, still frozen, says she won't allow her to leave. But Sarah replies that she'll leave regardless. The only choice her mom has is how it happens. Sarah warns her to consider how people will react if both her daughters run away. As she prepares to leave, she mocks her mom, insisting she only flies first class. Her mom yells at her as she walks away. Outside the room, Sarah closes the door, feeling both exhausted and relieved. For the first time, she feels free. Back at Wellston, Blake and Ison are reading the front page of the school's newspaper. The article, written by an anonymous source, accuses the students of setting the smoke bomb at the mall. Suddenly, Blake, Ison, and Remy are summoned to the headmaster's office. Inside, the headmaster tells them they should know why they were called. He then asks if the details in the article are true. Remy denies it, explaining that the article doesn't tell the full story. She clarifies that they followed the culprit but were mistaken as the ones who set the bomb. They also assure the headmaster that they've already cleared things up with the authorities. The headmaster is glad to hear that, but reminds them of an important rule. At Wellston, they have the freedom to use their abilities as they wish. However, once they step off campus, they must be more cautious because Wellston's reputation depends on their behavior. He advises them not to act impulsively in similar situations and to consider the consequences of their actions. After leaving the office, Blake comments that the meeting wasn't as bad as he expected. Eisen jokes, surprised that the headmaster even reads the school's newspaper. As they walk, Remy grows curious about how someone at school could have known about the events. The incident was recent and took place over the weekend. She begins to wonder if someone has been following them. On the rooftop of the school, Arlo looks annoyed as the door opens. John enters, cheerful to have found Arlo again. John approaches and asks if Arlo enjoyed the mango boba while holding a binder of papers. Arlo sighs and asks why John is on the rooftop again. John replies calmly that he just wants to take a break. Arlo reminds him that the rooftop is off limits and says John should understand that by now. John counters, saying that if Arlo truly wanted to throw him off, he would have done it already. John remarks that Arlo spends a lot of time there. Arlo admits that the rooftop is quiet and helps him clear his mind. This statement causes John to recall his time as king, spending moments alone on the rooftop. Lost in thought, John suddenly remembers he has class and prepares to leave. Before going, he asks Arlo if he's free after school. Arlo replies with a firm no, saying he has errands to run. John insists, asking if he can tag along. Arlo refuses again, but John presses him, telling him to meet at the school gates after classes. Without waiting for a reply, John rushes off to class. Arlo stands there, wondering how Sarah manages to deal with someone like John. After classes, Arlo is waiting at the school gates. When John arrives, he's surprised to see Arlo actually showed up. John asks Arlo where they're heading next. John and Arlo are on a bullet train heading to an unknown destination. John, growing impatient, thinks about how long they've been on the train. He finally asks Arlo where they're going. Arlo tells him to relax and wait until they arrive. Meanwhile, at the airport, Sarah has just gotten off her plane. She tries calling John but gets no answer, concluding that he still hasn't bought a new phone. She takes a taxi and starts heading toward Wellston School. Elsewhere in the city, Arlo and John step off the bullet train. John looks around and asks where they are. Arlo calmly explains that they've arrived at the Wellston Turf War location. John immediately becomes anxious and reminds Arlo that he's a cripple. He protests that he's not used to this kind of environment and thought Arlo's errands would be something simple, like shopping. Arlo tells him not to worry, assuring him there won't be a fight. He's just there to meet some people. In the deserted area, John and Arlo encounter a group of people. John freezes when he recognizes them. They're the same ones who broke his phone. Tense, John demands an explanation from Arlo. Arlo remains calm, telling him to stay put and wait for a moment, and he approaches the group. Suddenly, Arlo gives them a signal. Without warning, he orders them to lock John down. A girl activates her power, forming sharp claws over her hands. She charges at John alongside another guy. The scene catches John off guard, triggering memories of Claire's betrayal. Before he can react, the girl gets close and slashes deep cuts into his arm with her claws. Before he can recover, the other guy uses his ability to create a whirlwind, hurling John backward. John crashes to the ground, his body battered and bleeding. The girl places her claws against John's neck, pinning him in place. Arlo smirks and says, "Surprise!" John, lying on the ground and seething with anger, feels the sting of betrayal once again from someone he trusted. John lies on the ground, held down by the two attackers while blood drips from his fresh wounds. Arlo stands over him, composed but cold. He begins introducing the attackers to John and remarks that John probably already recognizes them, as they were the ones who broke his phone. John grits his teeth, anger flaring, and asks how Arlo knows about that. Arlo's expression remains steady as he replies that he told them to do it. The words hit John like a blow. Arlo continues, his voice sharp and condescending. He asks if John ever stopped to think why someone of his status would tolerate being near a cripple. He smirks and admits that he didn't bring John there to be his friend. He never had any intention of that. He reveals that he hates him. Suddenly, John's mind flashes back to a painful memory. He's holding a letter, his hands trembling. It's apparently a love letter written by Claire. John's face flushes with excitement as he clutches the note, his heart racing. As he reaches the meeting spot indicated in the letter, he freezes in place. Claire isn't alone. She is surrounded by a group of people. John's heart sinks as she begins to speak, revealing her true intentions. The betrayal sends John into a blind rage. He charges toward them, fury overtaking him. The memory fades, dragging John back to the present. Arlo's voice cuts through the haze as he explains that he brought John there for one reason, to put him in his place. Looking down at John with a sinister grin, he wonders how much it would take to break him. He gestures to the empty, desolate surroundings and states that there is no one around for miles. No one to save him. They have all the time in the world to make sure John understands his true position. Arlo stands and begins pacing. He reveals that everything John has experienced in the past few weeks was his doing. Arlo states that Serafina's suspension, his limited contact with her, the mid-tiers attacking him, and every single encounter were orchestrated by him. Frustration and despair bubble inside John. He had come to Wellston to turn over a new leaf, to leave his past behind. He hadn't harmed anyone and had tried to stay out of trouble, yet everything was ending the same way. Frustration and anger fill his face. He shakes, trembling from the weight of it all. He thinks to himself that he isn't the monster. They are. Arlo looks down at him, triumphant. He asks if John has anything to say. John doesn't respond and keeps his head lowered. Arlo shrugs and turns to the girl, ordering her to help him understand. The girl steps forward, claws at the ready. Suddenly, John lifts his head and screams Arlo's name, his voice echoing across the barren area. A massive whirlwind of black air erupts from him, sending Arlo's allies flying backward. They crash to the ground, stunned and struggling to comprehend what just happened. The aura around John is suffocating, a dark and chaotic energy radiating outward. His fury manifests as a yellow glow in his eyes, and a strange black aura swirling around him. The group stares in disbelief. They realize that the power of the cripple is actually throwing them back. Arlo's expression shifts slightly, but not to fear. He smirks, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. One of Arlo's allies is confused, as he was told that John was a cripple. He notices that Arlo is still smiling, so everything must still be going according to Arlo's plan. Suddenly, black claws emerge from John's hands, similar to the girl's. John charges toward Arlo. As he's about to strike, the girl barely manages to stop him. She is shocked to discover someone with the same ability as hers. John doesn't flinch when clashing with her. With ease, he uses his claws to cut deeply into her body. The girl collapses, bleeding heavily. John prepares to strike again, yelling at her not to interfere. Before he can attack, the other guy creates a whirlwind to push John away from the girl. John counters by creating a black whirlwind around him, stopping the guy's wind attack. The guy is shocked to see that his attack barely affects John and that he's also using a wind ability like his. Arlo's allies decide to attack together to stand a chance against John. The guy creates a whirlwind to launch the girl forward, while she readies her claws. John calls them trash and uses his power to accumulate wind in his hands, launching blades of wind at them. The girl is surprised since these wind blades are not part of her ally's abilities. She narrowly dodges them, but her friend is struck directly. The girl becomes enraged and charges at John. He easily evades her attack, accumulating wind once more. He creates a final whirlwind, launching the girl into the air. The wind guy can barely move, but he spots his friend falling rapidly. He prepares to save her, but John appears behind him and pierces his arm with his claws. Wind guy finally admits defeat, acknowledging that John is far stronger than the two of them. He begs John to let him save his friend, but John shows no interest. John pushes him down with his foot, disregarding his plea. Wind guy continues begging, saying that John can do whatever he wants with him, but at least let him save his friend. The girl keeps falling, and the guy screams in desperation. John strikes him again to silence him, as the girl crashes to the ground. Both of them lie unconscious on the floor, battered and wounded. John turns his gaze to Arlo, filled with fury. Arlo looks at him, surprised to see what John has been hiding all this time. John launches one air blade toward Arlo, but he easily deflects them with his arm. John then creates a whirlwind around Arlo to obstruct his vision and charges in, aiming to strike with his claws. Inside the whirlwind, Arlo focuses to sense the direction of the attack, thinking that a little wind isn't enough to make him activate his barrier. John appears and strikes with his claws, but Arlo evades the attack and remains unharmed. Frustrated, John decides to use the wind to rise above the ground and charges at full speed toward Arlo to strike again. As John gets closer, Arlo thinks that once he activates his barrier, John will probably be able to use it too. Arlo decides that the best course of action is to end the fight with one blow. Finally, John's claws clash with Arlo's barrier. The impact causes the damage to reflect back toward John, injuring his arm and making it bleed. However, Arlo starts spitting blood, since John's attack managed to crack his barrier. Arlo seizes the opportunity as John's momentum decreases from the pain and lands a punch, sending John flying across the arena. John recovers from the impact, but one of his arms is severely injured. Arlo takes the initiative, creating a barrier around John and slowly begins to shrink it. Suddenly, John creates another barrier inside the first one to stop it from crushing him. John uses the opportunity to start hitting Arlo's barrier with all his strength. Both John and Arlo are taking damage with each hit, turning the battle into an endurance contest. Finally, John breaks free from the barrier, causing significant damage to Arlo. John charges again at full speed toward Arlo. However, Arlo is too weak to create a barrier in time and receives a direct hit to the stomach. Arlo flies backward, but John creates another barrier to stop him from going too far. Arlo still cannot process the fact that John is using his own ability against him. In that moment, John delivers a powerful punch to Arlo's face. John continues launching kicks and punches without taking a break. Arlo manages to stop one of John's punches, but before he can react, John headbutts him. Finally, Arlo collapses to the floor, completely defeated. John, not satisfied with this, places his shoe on Arlo's face. John threatens him, saying that if Arlo speaks of what just happened, he'll dethrone him. A while later, Elaine rushes toward Arlo's location. Upon arriving, Elaine is stunned by the sight of the three of them completely beaten up. She approaches Arlo and asks him to explain what happened. Arlo asks her to calm down and suggests healing the two guys first since they are in much worse condition. As Elaine heals them, she wonders if the two fought against mirror versions of themselves, as she can't fathom how such a fight could occur. She notes that she has never seen Arlo so badly injured and can't imagine anyone besides Serafina being able to do that. Elaine asks Arlo again to explain what happened and how he ended up so injured. Arlo cuts her off, telling her that it's better she doesn't know and asks her to keep the whole incident a secret. Elaine agrees, but she senses something is off about Arlo. He seems shaken, and he doesn't realize that when someone as powerful as him shows signs of worry, it frightens everyone around them. Back in the city, John, severely injured, walks toward his house. He thinks about being betrayed by Claire and now Arlo. His anger boils over, and he throws his bag in frustration. It hits the frame outside his house, alerting Sarah, who has been waiting for John to return. Upon seeing him, Sarah calls his name and picks up his bag. John, shocked by her presence, freezes, especially given his battered condition. Sarah approaches with a smile and says, "It's been a while." Suddenly, John collapses to his knees, the stress finally overwhelming him. When Sarah notices, she rushes toward John to help him. As she holds him, she asks what happened to him. John recalls everything that transpired and starts crying. Feeling vulnerable, he begs Sarah not to look at him in this pathetic state. Sarah, who has always seen John as strong and confident, wonders what could have happened to break him down like this. Sarah helps John stand up and leads him inside the house. wondering what events might have unfolded during her absence. Inside the house, John rests on the sofa while Sarah calls Elaine to ask her to heal him. Elaine picks up Serafina's call, and upon hearing her name, Arlo wonders why she came back earlier. Elaine continues the call and agrees to meet Serafina as soon as possible. Before leaving, she asks Arlo if he's okay. He confirms, but his expression suggests otherwise. Elaine is about to leave when Arlo grabs her arm, making her blush. He reminds her to keep her promise about the incident. Back at John's house, Sarah is filling a glass with water and some ice. She approaches John from behind and softly presses the cold glass against his neck. He jumps off the sofa, but the movement causes pain, reminding him of his injuries. John tells her to be more careful with his injuries, but Sarah dismisses him, saying that Elaine will arrive shortly. Sarah then asks him what happened. John answers that the obvious happened. The cripple is now targeted by everyone since his strong friend is gone. Sarah doesn't buy it and asks him to tell the real story, as it's the first time she's seen him in this state. John tries to change the subject, asking her where she had been the whole time. But Sarah remains stoic, like a wall. John continues, saying she had him worried when she disappeared without a word. Sarah explains that her mom cut the Wi-Fi, but she convinced her parents to let her return early, so she'll be staying at his house for a while. She then demands a full explanation about what happened to him. John tries to think but can't handle the weight of Sarah's gaze, so he gives in. He explains that he got tired of the bullying and didn't want Sarah to see him so defeated. But now that she's back, everything can return to normal. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. It's Elaine. Sarah opens the door and finds an exhausted Elaine, who apologizes for taking so long. Sarah invites her in, but Elaine apologizes again, this time for all the issue about the Unordinary book. Sarah dismisses it, saying everything is fine now. Elaine, relieved to be free from guilt, asks Sarah why she called her. But before Sarah can answer, Elaine notices John in the room and loudly asks why he's there too. John, not happy, reminds her that it's his house. In the living room, Elaine is reluctantly healing John while mocking him, calling him lucky for being Serafina's friend. Otherwise, she wouldn't be helping him. She continues teasing him for picking fights he can't win, unaware of the danger. John starts sensing Elaine's aura and notices that it's much weaker than usual. This gives a hint as to how John was able to detect the presence of the invisible man outside the mall. Elaine asks John to show her his other arm, but John refuses, mentioning that the doctor will heal it tomorrow. However, Elaine insists, saying there's no way she's leaving a job halfway, especially after Sarah asked her to help. John still hesitates, reluctant to accept. Elaine snaps and forcefully grabs John's arm. While healing it, she wonders who he messed with to end up with injuries like that. Slowly, she starts noticing that the patterns of the wounds look familiar, and the dots start to connect. One arm has claw marks from the girl who was with Arlo, while the other shows signs of damage from Arlo's barrier. Elaine gets incredibly nervous, unable to believe that someone who was supposed to be a cripple could have caused all of this. John notices Elaine's expression and, before she can say anything, covers her mouth with his hand. With a menacing gaze, John tells her to shut up. Elaine looks terrified, and John finally tells her to listen carefully to his instructions. After a while, Sarah returns to the living room after unpacking her things. She notices that Elaine is gone and asks John where she is. John mentions that Elaine just left. Apparently something urgent came up and she had to hurry. Sarah thinks it's pretty strange that Elaine left without saying goodbye. It's 5 a.m. at Wellston School, and Arlo walks through empty aisles. His mind is still stuck on his memories of being beaten up by John. Suddenly, the guy who was saved by John a long time ago, who possesses invisibility powers, appears around the corner, checking on Arlo from behind. In the infirmary, the doctor chats with Keen, the head security at Wellston. Keen tells the doctor that he's tired of the investigation, as he hasn't found anything so far. He mentions that he's scanned all members of the faculty and the guests from the last couple of months, but hasn't found any connections with the authorities. Keen decides to change the topic, saying that he's heard the doctor has a new girlfriend and should at least try to look happier about it. Keen inquires about the doctor's relationship progress, but the doctor asks him to calm down, as it's not serious yet. He adds that he'll be going on another date with her the same week because she has something to tell him. Keen mocks him, telling him to prepare for a breakup. The doctor says Layla, his girlfriend, is a project manager, really smart and very attractive. Keen asks exactly how attractive. The doctor answers with an 11. Suddenly, Arlo appears out of nowhere, causing the doctor to spit his coffee in surprise. Before saying anything important, Arlo congratulates the doctor on getting a super hot girlfriend, much to the doctor's annoyance. The doctor then asks Arlo to explain what happened to his face. Arlo says he's not there to talk about it and just wants to heal up to avoid freaking out the people in the school. The doctor stands to look for the medicine, clearly annoyed that he couldn't enjoy his morning coffee in peace. Keen asks Arlo if everything's all right. Arlo replies that for the most part, it is. Keen mentions that it's a very big deal and asks who did this to him. Arlo dismisses the question, saying that he has the situation under control. The doctor returns with the medicine and hands it to Arlo. He mentions that, since he hasn't treated Arlo many times, the tonic will slowly heal his visible wounds, but it should be healed before classes start. Arlo thanks him, and the doctor reminds him to stay out of trouble. As Arlo leaves, the doctor asks Keen who could have done that to him. Keen guesses that John is probably the culprit, surprising the doctor. The doctor refutes, saying that John has been playing cripple so far. Keen continues, stating that John is the only one who could even touch Arlo. The doctor remains unsure, but he remembers his last encounter with John, who was acting very irritable. It seems that the authorities of the school knew all along that John wasn't a cripple. After a while, Blake and Eisen are walking through an aisle. Eisen is irritated because he doesn't understand his class, but Blake mocks him, saying that with studying, the classes are easy to follow. Suddenly, they hear rumors about Arlo going to the infirmary covered in bruises. Apparently, someone was able to beat him. This alarms Eisen, and he deduces that Arlo didn't listen to his warnings and ended up fighting with John. Blake yells at Eisen, snapping him out of his thoughts. Blake immediately denies the rumors, saying there's no way he believes those lies about Arlo losing a fight. In another part of the school, Remy is heading toward the press room. Upon entering, he calls for Cecile, the turquoise-haired girl who is checking the school's newspaper. She asks Remy what she's doing there. Remy tells her that she needs to know who the anonymous writer is. Cecile remains silent, her face stoic, before she closes her newspaper. She mocks Remy, asking if she doesn't know what the meaning of anonymous is. Remy responds that the person who submitted the article is planning something. Cecile asks for a source, but Remy says she just has a feeling. Hearing this, Cecile refuses to help, stating that without a proper reason, she won't hand over confidential information. Remy tries to convince her, saying that something bigger is happening around them, though she's still not sure what it is. Cecile tells Remy to get her information elsewhere. She won't risk her reputation over something so vague. Remy gets serious and reminds Cecile that she's the queen and demands she tell her the name. Cecile laughs with a smirk upon hearing Remy use her position as the queen. Remy continues, saying that her responsibility as the queen is to maintain a safe environment for everyone, and she needs the information for that. Cecile cuts her off, calling her speech a joke. Suddenly, Cecile moves in front of Remy with great speed. She tells Remy that if she wants that information, she'll have to force her to say it. Remy starts shaking, unsure of what to do in this situation. Cecile relaxes and tells Remy that she might have the title, but she's too pathetic to have authority. She adds that Remy should already know how to establish her dominance when she wants something, and reminds her that people won't step out of line if they know their place. Cecile continues, saying that she knows about Remy's encounter with the cripple. Remy didn't just help him, she even let him hit her without any consequences. Angrily, Cecile asks if that's the kind of example Remy wants to set, treating superiors however she wants, even if they are stronger. Remy tries to excuse herself, but Cecile cuts her off, calling her an embarrassment. Suddenly, Cecile adds that Remy is as delusional as her brother, hitting a nerve in Remy. Remy confronts her, demanding that she not speak about Ray in that way. Cecile then asks if Remy is aware of the kind of king her brother was. She tells her that Ray was a king who didn't care about hierarchy, gave low tiers false hope, and burdened high tiers with useless responsibilities. She continues, saying that he left the school in complete chaos, but thankfully Arlo and Serafina were able to fix most of the mess. Remy refutes this, saying that Ray didn't mess up. He just wanted to help everyone and make everyone help each other. Cecile grows tired and tells her that she doesn't know anything, and that kindness and sincerity are just a waste of time. Cecile finishes by saying that Remy's brother was an idealist and a weak king. She tells Remy to learn from his mistakes and move forward. Finally, Remy leaves the press room, her eyes starting to water as she remembers her brother. She wonders if Ray's sacrifice to help others had any worth. Suddenly, she notices another death pool on the billboard and wonders if everything her brother did made any difference. Meanwhile, Arlo is walking down another aisle when his phone buzzes. It's a message from Remy, asking him if he's busy after school. Now we find Eisen spying on John while he is being bullied by two guys. One of them is yelling because John made his uniform dirty after bumping into him. He demands an apology. Instead, John calls him trash and tells him to get out of his sight. The bully gets enraged, grabbing John's shirt and daring him to repeat himself. Reaching the edge of his patience, John calls him trash once again. Before the situation escalates, Eisen steps in, kicking the bully aside. The bully groans in pain until he notices that it was Eisen who struck him. They immediately rush away from the scene, terrified. John begins picking up his papers, and Eisen approaches to ask him if everything is all right, but John slaps his hand away, telling him with a stern gaze not to touch him. John starts walking off while Ison remains frozen in place, thinking that he has to keep John calm until Serafina comes back. Outside of Wellston, Arlo is waiting for Remy on a bench in a park. She finally arrives, and Arlo calls her Pinky while reminding her that it's late. Remy counters, calling him Aslo. She finally sits, and Arlo tells her that he heard about the bomb incident at the mall. She brushes it off, saying it wasn't a big deal, just a smoke bomb. However, it was serious enough for her to be called to the headmaster's office. Arlo reminds her that it's important how she presents herself outside of school because there's a reputation to uphold. She shifts the topic, mentioning that the details in the article about the bomb incident were very precise, except for the fact that they were framed. It's as if the person who wrote the article had been watching their every move. Remy changes the subject again, saying she heard the rumors about Arlo visiting the infirmary. Arlo is shocked. He made sure no one was following him that morning, but hides it with a smile. He says it's ridiculous for her to believe such things, but Remy replies that it might be true considering everything that's been going on. Arlo concludes that they're both being monitored. Remy continues, saying that since he's the strongest among them, he might be able to ignore it, but the rest are scared. Arlo then asks her to explain exactly what happened at the mall. Remy explains that they only stopped at a booth offering prizes to everyone with a 5 or more on the level scale. In other words, high tiers. The moment she received her prize, she already knew it had a chip in it, and that's because the prize was the same teddy bear Serafina had. This last detail made them realize that Sarah was probably being tracked too. Arlo then concludes that the person who wrote the article must be working under Cecile, who is also a high tier. Those people likely have information about all high tiers at Wellston. But what troubles Arlo the most is how long this has been going on, and what their true purpose is. Remy still keeps her composure, believing that Arlo was still safe, but then everything clicks. The fact that someone spread rumors about Arlo being injured means he's also being observed. Remy stands up, realizing that the rumors were actually true. Her face, full of disappointment, can't believe Arlo lied to her. She demands to know if hiding the truth was really that necessary. Arlo averts his gaze, trying to reassure her that everything's fine. She yells, saying that nothing around them is okay. She starts trembling, trying to understand why he acts like that, especially after what happened to Remy's brother. She keeps shouting, saying that nobody is invincible, while Arlo looks perplexed. Remy calms down a little and sits again, asking why he's acting like Ray, always hiding things from her while everyone around keeps getting hurt. Remy starts crying. Her helplessness overtakes her. She doesn't think she'll be able to endure losing someone else again. Arlo embraces her as she tries to wipe her tears. He reassures her that he's strong, so he'll be fine. But instead of giving her peace, she responds that Ray was also strong. The tension eases a bit, and Remy decides to ask who was able to defeat Arlo, but he confesses he can't say a word. She tries to guess, accusing the Ember organization. But Arlo is surprised, wondering why Ember would go after someone like him. Arlo tries to reassure her again, saying that those injuries aren't anything serious, just some personal matters. He'll reveal everything eventually, so she shouldn't worry. Arlo brings up the high-tier situation again, and is completely certain that the answers must lie within someone at school. At the airport, a mysterious man steps off a plane holding a slip of paper with John's address. Meanwhile, at Wellston, Arlo walks through the hallway, deep in thought. His classmate has to raise his voice to bring him back to focus. Just then, John accidentally bumps into Arlo again. Arlo immediately tenses up, unsure of what John will do. Before anything happens, Arlo's classmate grabs John, ready to punish him for bumping into the king. But Arlo stops him harshly, grabbing his arm and applying pressure. The classmate is shocked. He's never seen Arlo lose composure like that. Arlo reprimands him, saying that someone powerful like him should focus on more productive things instead of wasting energy on someone as worthless as John. He releases the classmate and walks off, leaving him confused. As he continues walking, Arlo's thoughts are filled with disgust toward John. He hates how John hides his power, pretending to be powerless. Even worse, John is dragging Serafina into that same mindset. Arlo sees it as cowardly, abandoning the responsibilities that come with strength and leaving everything to him. Around the corner, Ison has seen everything. He's thrilled at the idea of a confrontation between two kings. He'd love to write about it, but he values his life too much to try. Elsewhere, in John's house, Serafina is sitting and checking her phone when the mysterious man from earlier suddenly opens the door. He calls out to John but pauses, startled to see Serafina instead, thinking that he just broke into someone's house. She quickly realizes that he is John's father. He recognizes her too, thanks to her distinctive purple hair. They both shake hands, and John's dad introduces himself as William. Serafina mentions that John talks about him often, which makes William a bit flustered. When he asks where John is, Sarah says he should be back soon from school and casually adds that she's suspended. Curious, William asks why, as he thinks what kind of classmates John is hanging with. Sarah reveals it's because she got caught reading a book called Unordinary. Hearing that shocks William. He instantly connects the dots. John had asked him for a new copy of Unordinary after his previous one got confiscated. William had no idea John had shared the book with someone else, let alone someone like Serafina. He's amazed she wasn't expelled for it. Serafina confidently says there's no way they could get rid of her. William quietly wonders why kids nowadays act so self-important, remembering that even John got expelled once despite his strength. He mentions that John wasn't kidding when he told him that Sarah was very powerful, and out of curiosity, he asks who is stronger between her and John. He shows a proud expression for his son while waiting for the answer, still unaware that John hides his abilities. But his expression breaks when Sarah starts laughing, taking William's question as a joke. Just then, the door opens. John's back. He's surprised to see his dad and immediately asks what he's doing there. William raises an eyebrow, amused that John expects him to need a reason to visit his own son. John, clearly caught off guard, complains that William should have told him beforehand. William calmly replies that he tried, but John either ignored his calls or hung up. John asks Serafina for a moment alone with his dad and tries to pull him aside, but William doesn't move. He scolds John for being disrespectful toward his father. Serafina watches them with a soft smile, noting that William is nothing like her own mother. Outside, William lectures John, saying he needs to answer calls or else he'll worry. With no other choice, he decided to visit him in person. John assures him that everything is fine. William smirks, teasing that of course things are fine. John's got a girl living with him. John blushes and quickly clarifies that Sarah is only staying there because she's suspended and had nowhere else to go. He couldn't just leave her like that. William settles down and says Sarah seems like a good girl. Curious, John asks what they talked about. Proudly, William shares that he learned Sarah got suspended because of John and that apparently John can't stop talking about his dad. He even asked her who was stronger between the two. John instantly reacts, almost shouting, "Why would he ask that?" William, calm as ever, says he was just curious. John panics, afraid that Sarah might have figured out the truth. He asks what she said, and upon hearing that she laughed it off, he breathes a sigh of relief. But William senses something's off. He questions John's strange behavior and gets more suspicious when John refuses to talk. William says if John won't explain, he'll just ask Sarah. That finally breaks John. Desperate, he begs his dad to wait and then tells him the truth. William doesn't understand. Why pretend to be powerless? He reminds John that he always taught him to defend himself, not hide. John lowers his gaze, haunted by old memories. He recalls how, at his previous school, people constantly talked behind his back, calling him a tyrant and a terrible person. John was not able to control himself, and he ended up losing his temper, doing everything in his power to shut them up. It got to the point that he started to think that he didn't deserve his own power. William listens quietly and tells him that, whether he deserves it or not, that power will always be part of him. John nods, but says living like a cripple feels more right. With Sarah by his side, he can be himself without being judged for how strong he is. But William challenges that. He talks about trust, yet he's lying to her. The words hit John hard. How long does he plan to keep hiding it? William reminds him he can't keep it up forever. John snaps, saying he knows that already, but right now, he has no reason to tell her. Internally, William suspects John's real fear, that Sarah will leave him once she finds out. That night, John and Sarah are doing homework, while William naps on the sofa. John struggles with a question and asks Sarah if she got 103 degrees too. She stares at him, baffled by his answer. It wasn't even a degree-based problem. She gets up to check what he did, but before she can, William wakes up. He's surprised they're still doing homework so late. John says the questions are hard, but William points out Sarah finished hours ago. John is left speechless, while Sarah beams with pride. William adds that he didn't fly all the way there just to watch John study. He gets up and asks where the poker set is. He's in the mood to play cards. John is clearly embarrassed by his dad, but Sarah laughs and says William is awesome. He actually prioritizes spending time with his son, unlike her mom. The three of them are now seated, playing a game of poker. With her current hand, Sarah feels confident and raises her bet. John and William don't flinch and immediately match the raise, surprising Sarah with their composure. She glances at the table and realizes the situation doesn't look favorable for her. She decides to wait, expecting John's move. He promptly raises the bet to a ridiculous level, shocking her with the confidence he must have in his hand. However, based on the cards on the table, his chances of winning appear to be very low. Sarah tries to tell if John is bluffing, but his expression reveals nothing. Suddenly, William goes all in as well. Sarah's mind is spinning as she tries to deduce their hands and see if she has any shot at victory. But in the end, she folds, deciding she'd rather witness the showdown between father and son. They reveal their cards, and William emerges victorious, exposing John's bluff. Sarah slams the table, frustrated that she let herself get tricked. She actually had the winning hand, but their demeanor made her believe she didn't stand a chance. William explains that's the beauty of poker. Even without strong cards, you can win. What matters is how you carry yourself and how others perceive you. They begin a second game, and once again, Sarah has a solid hand. Determined not to fall for any bluffs, she aggressively raises her bet. John follows, but with a smaller amount, making Sarah think his hand might be weak. She raises the stakes even more, surprising both of them. Still composed, John matches her bet, but William folds in frustration. The match between John and Sarah finally begins. Without hesitation, John goes all in. Sarah starts feeling uneasy, doubting her hand. When she tries to read his face, it's completely blank, as if she's staring into a void. Despite the pressure, she chooses to continue, and both reveal their cards, making official John's victory. With a frustrated expression, Sarah still can't believe she got tricked again, despite having a strong hand. John praises her performance and credits his victory to luck. He's excited for another round, but Sarah is already tired and just wants to go to sleep. Later, William and John are asleep in the living room while Sarah lies awake, staring at the ceiling. She reflects on poker and realizes it's not just about the cards, but about presentation and perception. She finally understands how John manages to carry himself with such confidence. He uses the same principles of poker in everyday life, projecting certainty even when things aren't in his favor. But something felt different during the game. John is usually easy to read and highly expressive, yet today, it was like she couldn't see through him at all, while he read her like an open book. Morning arrives, and William is still sleeping on the couch. Suddenly, a loud scream jolts him awake. The culprit is John, who just managed to finish his homework on time. With barely any time left, he rushes to get ready, but not before telling his dad to visit a famous sandwich shop a couple of blocks away. Before leaving, he reminds William to ask Sarah for directions if he has trouble finding it. Since William is already up, he stretches a bit before heading out for a run. Just then, a groggy Sarah appears, asking what all the noise was about. After William explains that John was the one shouting, he invites her to join him on the run. She declines and heads back to bed. Meanwhile, at Wellston, Cecile is in the press room when someone knocks and walks in unannounced. It's Arlo, and he's clearly there for a reason. Without wasting time, he asks about the author of the bomb article. Cecile immediately realizes that Arlo is helping Remy and tells him to stop spoiling her. She's bitter about what's going to happen to Wellston after they graduate. She feels like they're leaving the school in incompetent hands that will ruin the order. She compares it to what happened when Ray was king, and that final remark pushes Arlo over the edge. He slams the table, startling Cecile. He reminds her that the reason she's no longer a royal is because Remy dethroned her, and that she should show more respect instead of mocking her. She should be grateful Remy didn't destroy her completely. Channeling his intimidating presence as the king of Wellstons, Arlo demands the name one last time. Cecile, now trembling, finally gives in and reveals it. Terrence, a name we haven't heard before. With a smug look, Arlo mocks her, saying, "That wasn't so hard, was it?" Elsewhere in the city, William and Sarah are leaving the sandwich shop John recommended. As they walk and talk about how good the food was, Sarah brings up a question that's been on her mind. She asks William about the inspiration behind Unordinary, saying she's never read anything quite like it. William explains that, as someone without powers, the world has always seemed unfair to him. That led him to wonder, what would the world be like if everyone were equal, if nobody had powers? And what if there existed a being with unmatched strength, someone who could see people's strengths and weaknesses? How would that person guide the world to make people happy? He goes on to say that if he were that person, he'd want to create a world open to everyone, one that doesn't revolve around who's stronger. He admits it's a little embarrassing that the main character is based on him, but he's happy that the story resonated with so many people. Sarah then asks why he dedicated the book to John if the story was inspired by his own experiences. William reveals that, at the time, John was going through a rough period, and this surprises Sarah. He didn't have the right tools to reach out to John directly, so he tried speaking to him through the book. Despite everything, he says he feels relieved now. He's glad to see that John is doing well and that he has a friend like her looking out for him. Sarah brushes it off, saying there's no need to thank her. After all, John always finds a way to take care of himself. Night falls, and William is getting ready to leave, even though he only spent one night with John. He explains that his visit was just to check in and make sure John wasn't doing anything reckless. Now, feeling reassured, he says he's glad knowing Sarah is there to keep an eye on him. Sarah thanks William for writing such an inspiring story and wishes him the best. Despite everything, she says that he is strong in his own way. Moved by her words, William can't help but hug them both before heading out. Just before taking his taxi, William gives John a final reminder. The more he hides his secret, the worse things will get. John pulls away from the hug, replying that he knows. With a small smile, he tells his dad to be careful on the way home. As William walks to the car, he glances back at John and Sarah one last time. His expression changes. His thoughts drift to Claire. He silently begs his son to make his choices wisely, unsure if John could handle going through something like that again. Back inside the house, John reminds Sarah that tomorrow will be her last day of suspension and asks if she's excited. She coldly replies with a no. She knows that once she returns, her suspension will be the talk of the school. She'll have to face everyone's stares and gossip all over again. Sarah adds that maybe getting expelled would have been better. That comment strikes a chord in John, who disagrees. He tells her that someone as strong as her shouldn't have a mark like that on her record. Seeing how serious he looks, Sarah gives him a light kick and reminds him she was just joking. She admits that what she'll miss the most is her current situation, being away from school and her parents, with no one poking into her life. For once, she was able to clear her mind, and she's sure that going back is going to suck. Meanwhile, at Serafina's house, someone knocks at the door. The servant opens it and finds two men in suits waiting outside. When she asks what they want, they say they're there on behalf of the authorities. The servant immediately tenses, confused about what kind of business the authorities could have with them. She apologizes, saying Sarah's parents aren't home, and tries to close the door, but one of the men blocks it with his hand. He calmly explains that they have orders to interrogate Serafina before her suspension ends. They hand the servant an official document requesting an audience with her. They begin to step forward, but the servant stops them again, explaining that Sarah is no longer there. She returned to Wellston at the beginning of the week. Surprised, one of the men asks where she's staying, noting that no one informed them about her return. The servant replies that she doesn't know either. The best way to find her is to wait for her to return to school. The men seem to believe her and leave without further questioning. Once the door closes, the servant finally exhales in relief. Apparently, the influence the authorities have is even greater than expected. At Wellston's infirmary, Keen is throwing a weird glance at the doc, making him uncomfortable. The doc finally snaps and Keen mocks him, saying that he looks gloomier than usual. Keen asks him how bad his date went and if he got dumped by Leela. The doc mentions that there was no date since she canceled on him. He continues, saying that her employer sent her away for 2 weeks. Keen comments that it was short notice for a trip that long, and the doc agrees, hoping that everything works out for her. In a different aisle of the school, we find Elaine, who upon noticing Arlo approaching, nervously avoids her gaze. However, she gets called by Arlo, who asks why she's ignoring him. Elaine excuses herself, saying that she didn't notice him. Arlo doesn't buy it. He's sure they made eye contact. Elaine dismisses his comment and gets ready to leave, but Arlo grabs her and orders her to wait. He asks her if she was able to keep the secret of him being beaten up. Elaine confirms that she didn't say anything, but this only increases Arlo's curiosity about her strange behavior. Arlo glances at her with authority, and this makes her remember the gaze John launched at her. She gives up and decides to talk, just to confirm that John was the person who defeated Arlo and his 2 classmates in the Wellston turf war area. Arlo asks her how she knows, and Elaine says that Serafina called her to heal John while she was staying at his home, while explaining that a mysterious, invisible guy spies on them, who looks kind of familiar. Elaine starts trembling upon remembering the way John looked at her. Understandable, she felt like her life was at risk. She doesn't grasp exactly what it is, but she feels like there's something terrifying about John, to the point that even if Arlo is part of that, she doesn't want to get involved in anything related to John. And since she knows his secret, she feels like John could appear and go after her at any moment. Arlo tries to calm her down by patting her shoulder. He reaffirms that everything will be fine, as long as she keeps the secret and pretends she hasn't seen anything. Unintentionally, Elaine asks Arlo if he's already doing that because he's afraid of John. Arlo receives a direct hit on his pride and can't shake off the idea that he's actually scared. Suddenly, the invisible man makes a soft sound with his shoes, and Arlo perceives it. His suspicions that someone is following him around increase. Back at John's house, Sarah is finishing packing all her things. She's done much faster than expected, and for that, she decides to take a little walk to kill some time. She's in the middle of the street enjoying a drink, when suddenly a blonde girl detects her presence. She starts following Sarah, who remains unaware that she's being targeted. The blonde woman calls her, using the excuse that she left her phone at home and would be grateful if Sarah could tell her the time. During the interaction, someone else is spying on them, revealing that Sarah is Target 93, a code mentioned previously in the story. While the woman is talking, Sarah feels a strange sensation that travels all over her body and makes her drop her phone. The woman apologizes for making her drop it, but Sarah tells her not to worry. After giving her the time, the woman nervously thanks her and walks away quickly while her body was trembling. After a while, Sarah keeps walking, but she's been shaking ever since she felt that unsettling sensation. Suddenly, a loud noise catches her attention and she turns, revealing that a van is speeding directly toward her. She uses her ability to freeze time and moves out of the way. She notices that her body is trembling even more and starts worrying because she barely managed to avoid the impact. A man gets out of the van and immediately rushes toward her, asking if she's all right. Another man and a woman also get off the vehicle and start apologizing, insisting on whether she's truly okay. Stoically, Sarah tells them that she's fine, but warns them to drive more carefully. The woman doesn't believe she's truly all right and offers to take Sarah to the hospital. Forcefully, she grabs Sarah's hand and pulls her toward the van. Sarah starts feeling uneasy and doesn't notice a portal opening behind her. A man begins emerging from the portal just as Sarah manages to break free from the woman's grip. Sarah thanks them for the offer and repeats that she's fine, still unaware of the individual standing behind her. Out of nowhere, the man grabs her from behind and injects a blue chemical into her neck. Sarah is completely stunned, still trying to understand the situation she's been dragged into. She activates her ability and with a swift move, manages to knock down all 4 attackers at once. She tries to use her rewind ability but realizes she's unable to activate it. Sarah notices that one of the 4 people is still conscious and demands he explain what they did to her and why she's being targeted. Despite being defeated, the man refuses to answer and advises her to come with them without resisting, or they'll be forced to harm her. Sarah gets ready to use her ability again to make him talk, but suddenly she feels a sharp pain in her back. The woman who was supposedly knocked out managed to stand again and just stabbed Sarah with a knife. Sarah is paralyzed by fear and begins running out of options. Sarah snaps back and manages to throw an elbow, pushing the woman away from her. The woman slams into a wall and is finally knocked out. However, this gives the other 2 men enough time to stand up again, knives in hand. Sarah grabs the knife and pulls it out of her body. She starts noticing the effects of the chemical. Her ability is weakening to the point that she can't even rewind her wounds. Thankfully, at least she seems able to freeze the area where she was stabbed. She gets into a fighting stance and uses her ability once more, swiftly cutting down her 2 opponents, who had no time to react. They collapse, completely defeated, but when Sarah scans the area, she spots the 4th man escaping through one of his portals. She's about to chase him, but the pain from her wound suddenly returns. She's so weak that her freeze ability is wearing off from the injury. Her mind starts to blur, and she realizes the injection caused more than just physical harm. Desperately, she starts wondering how those people managed to obtain such a chemical and what they want from her to the point of targeting her. Her vision starts to fade, but she refuses to give up and stands, knowing she must return to John's house at all costs. She walks down the street, limping while everyone stares at her. People begin noticing the bloodstain from the wound, but the only thing on Sarah's mind is returning and calling Elaine to get healed. Suddenly, someone grabs her shoulder, alerting her. The random man tells her that she looks like she's in trouble and offers to help, but Sarah manages to break free from his grip and threatens him with the knife. Sarah demands he back off, while the people around her start freaking out at the sight of her with a weapon. She begins to lose consciousness again and decides to flee the scene, knowing her body won't hold up much longer. Meanwhile, John is returning from school, relieved that it's finally Friday. His main plan for the day is to help Sarah move all her things back to the Wellston dorms. He approaches the entrance of his house, but something catches his attention. John notices bloodstains all over the door handle. Upon opening the door, the sight paralyzes him. He finds Sarah unconscious on the floor, her body covered in blood from the wound. John rushes to her, desperately trying to wake her up. He then notices her bleeding, and his mind can't process how this could have happened. John grabs Sarah's phone and immediately calls Elaine, who is resting in her room. She picks up the phone, thinking that Sarah is calling her, and asks if she's all packed up. However, she hears John's voice on the other end of the call and freezes in fear. John tells her that she must come over as quickly as possible to heal Sarah, but before he can finish explaining, Elaine hangs up on him. He starts calling her repeatedly, but Elaine refuses to answer, begging to be left alone in peace. John is boiling with fury, to the point of wanting to settle things violently if they ever cross paths again. Upon checking Sarah's contacts, John realizes that his only option is to call Arlo. At the dorms, Arlo picks up his phone, expecting an answer from Sarah, but he's surprised to hear John telling him to come to his house with Elaine immediately. Arlo tries to ask what's going on, but John cuts him off, yelling at him to hurry. A short while later, Arlo and Elaine arrive at John's house. Arlo is shocked when he sees Sarah in that condition, unable to comprehend how this is even possible. Elaine rushes to her, asking how she ended up like this, but receives no answer. Elaine is perplexed, knowing that Sarah is undefeatable and doesn't know anyone capable of doing something like this. She immediately turns to John, asking what he did to Sarah and how he dared to do something like that. She keeps rambling, and slowly John begins to get annoyed by her accusations. He finally snaps and demands that she shut up as he slaps her. Elaine is shocked, not believing that John actually hit her. John yells, demanding that she heal Sarah right away instead of talking nonsense. Slowly, Elaine uses her ability, and Sarah's wounds begin to heal. Arlo watches the scene, trying to figure out how Sarah got hurt. Maybe she encountered someone who overpowered her. But he immediately rejects the idea. Maybe someone jumped her. But that's also ridiculous since she's too fast. The only explanation Arlo can think of is that Sarah didn't use her ability when she was attacked. Elaine finally finishes and nervously explains that Sarah's wounds are healed and she should be fine. However, John menacingly asks her why Sarah isn't waking up yet. Shaking, Elaine says that she's not sure why, that she's healthy, but something must be wrong. John stands, yelling sarcastically that any idiot could say that, and he wants to know exactly what's wrong. Elaine is completely terrified, swearing that she truly doesn't know. John gets ready to slap her again, calling her a failure of a healer. Elaine shrugs and braces for the hit, but before it can land, Arlo grabs John's arm and demands that he stop. With anger in his eyes, Arlo tells him to figure out the reason himself if he's so eager to know. Without flinching, John stares at him and demands that he remove his hand from him. Arlo keeps holding John's arm for a while, but he eventually complies and releases it. John stares at Elaine again, and she instantly reacts, raising her arms to shield herself. Upon seeing that expression, John recalls that Adrian used to protect himself the same way. He shifts his gaze back to Sarah and begins using his ability. He places his hand over her as a black aura starts emanating from it, as if scanning her to assess her condition. Elaine watches anxiously, wondering what John's ability could be. Meanwhile, Arlo immediately realizes that John is searching for other injuries. Suddenly, John's eyes widen, and he turns Sarah's head to reveal her neck. He just discovered the small wound caused by the needle. Both Arlo and Elaine are caught off guard, especially since not even Elaine's ability was able to detect that cut. John's fury begins to build as he demands to know what that injury is. Arlo explains that it was likely caused by a needle used to drug her, and that's probably the reason why she hasn't woken up. John's hand continues to emanate aura, and he uses it to heal Sarah's wound, revealing that he copied Elaine's ability. He states that the only thing he wants to know is who did this to her. Sarah remains unconscious on the floor despite being completely healed, so John carries her in his arms. Without saying a word, John decides to leave with Sarah. Elaine calls out to him despite being afraid, but Arlo quickly grabs her arm, telling her to let John handle things his way. In John's room, Sarah rests on the bed while he stays by her side, vowing to find whoever is responsible for what happened. Arlo remains in the living room, reflecting on the fact that in the 3 years he's known Sarah, she's never required medical attention. The idea that someone managed to outpace her reflexes and even neutralize her rewind ability is deeply unsettling. Arlo considers that someone that powerful roaming freely in the city is a serious threat. Suddenly, Elaine appears beside him holding a glass of water. She offers it to Arlo, but he rejects it without hesitation. Elaine doesn't react. She seems used to it. She sits next to Arlo and asks if everything is all right. Arlo responds by asking why she's bringing that up, and she admits she's noticed him acting unusually. Arlo is typically assertive, but when John is involved, he changes entirely and becomes passive. Arlo is taken aback by her words, but Elaine goes on, asking if John is actually much stronger than him and if he's the real king now, but they've decided to keep it a secret. Elaine fixes her gaze on Arlo and asks if he's now obeying everything John says. But when their eyes meet, she only sees Arlo glaring at her with a menacing stare, making her tremble instantly. Terrified once more, she apologizes, saying she's just confused by everything that's happening. Arlo simply replies that as long as no one provokes John, nothing will change. Elaine watches him nervously, choosing to believe his answer. Later that night, John falls asleep while watching over Sarah in his room. In the living room, both Arlo and Elaine also remain there to sleep. The night passes quietly, and no one notices the van approaching John's house. The people inside the van begin scanning the house from outside and fire a strange beam of energy at it. It triggers an unknown effect on everyone inside the house. A figure teleports into the living room and approaches Arlo and Elaine, holding a knife. Elaine stirs slightly upon hearing a sound and sees the intruder about to stab Arlo. She screams in fear to wake him and hurls herself in front of Arlo to shield him from the attack. Arlo reacts instantly, activating his ability, reinforcing his arm and grabbing the intruder by the neck before slamming him into the ground. He erects a barrier around both of them while demanding to know the reason behind the assault. Elaine removes the knife from her arm and begins using her healing ability, but notices it's barely having any effect. She then inspects the knife and realizes it's identical to the one Sarah had with her. This guy must be connected to her attack. Upon hearing that, Arlo smirks and tightens his grip, demanding the man to start talking. Suddenly, John turns on the light and yells at them to be quiet, but the scene before him leaves him stunned. He demands to know what's going on, and Arlo explains that they caught the culprit behind Sarah's condition. He adds that the man must be a fool for returning to retrieve her, but John barely listens. He's too focused on trying to understand why he didn't sense Arlo activating his barrier. Arlo reveals the intruder's face and orders him to talk. He wants to know who he is and why he's doing all of this. John joins in, pressing for answers about what they did to Sarah, but the intruder responds coldly, saying he won't reveal anything. John begins threatening him, but Arlo senses something is off. The man didn't resist and was subdued too easily. Arlo warns John to stop. Something about this feels wrong. There's no way someone this weak could have taken down Serafina. He demands to know what technique was used to leave her in that state. Suddenly, they hear a loud crash from the other side of the house. It sounds like it came from John's room, and he bolts away at full speed to check on Sarah. Elaine follows him, while Arlo remains. He realizes the man he captured was just a decoy. Enraged, he punches the intruder and knocks him out instantly. Arlo then heads toward John's bedroom, promising to deal with the man he just subdued. Inside John's room, a second intruder is about to escape through the window carrying Sarah. At that moment, John bursts into the room and commands the intruder not to take another step, activating his ability. However, nothing happens, and the intruder ignores him, leaping out the window. John rushes to the window, confused as to why his barrier didn't work. He jumps out as well, with Elaine watching from above. John starts chasing the intruder at full speed, knowing they're moments away from reaching the van. The man carrying Sarah is just inches from entering the vehicle, but a yellow barrier blocks his path. Arlo reached John's window just in time and activated his ability. Now, John and the intruder are inside the barrier. To defend himself, the man pulls out a knife and holds it to Sarah's neck. He warns John not to move, or she'll die. John freezes as the intruder demands he stop using his ability and deactivate the barrier immediately. John smirks and says the intruder must know that if anything happens to her, he won't make it out alive. He begins walking toward him, but the intruder doesn't hesitate and yells that he's being serious. He screams that he doesn't care if Sarah dies, slightly cutting her neck. Seeing this, John freezes again, and the intruder reveals he's aware that he's disposable, but Sarah isn't. John can barely contain himself. He demands the man to shut up and let her go. The intruder reminds him that all he needs to do is deactivate his ability and bring down the barrier so Sarah won't be harmed. John turns to Arlo and tells him to deactivate his shield. Arlo can't believe he's asking for something so reckless. He tells John that the moment the barrier is gone, the intruders will escape, but just as he finishes his sentence, John winks at him. Arlo gets irritated by the wink, while John shouts that there's nothing they can do since there's a knife on Sarah's throat. In that moment, Arlo tells Elaine to run outside and stay alert. Elaine nods and starts heading out while Arlo thinks John is acting like an idiot for yelling nonsense. The intruder demands they hurry up, and John knows time is running out. The attacker gets ready to make a second cut on Sarah's neck, and John decides to threaten Arlo, saying that if he doesn't take the barrier down, he'll go up there and beat his ass. Arlo studies his behavior and realizes John is stalling to find an opening. Arlo decides to play along and tells John to try it, adding that since he's also inside the barrier, he doubts John can escape. They keep arguing while Elaine remains in position with a knife, growing desperate watching them fight in such a critical moment. The intruder loses patience and orders them to stop and let him leave. But in that instant, he relaxes slightly and lowers the knife from Sarah's neck. John spots the opening and closes in, using the intruder's speed ability. He grabs the knife away from Sarah and tells the attacker that he's done. John strikes him with a powerful knee, follows with an elbow, and finishes with a punch, leaving the intruder completely unconscious on the ground. John walks up to him, ready to continue beating him. At that moment, Elaine exits her hiding spot and tells Arlo to open the barrier. Arlo reshapes the shield, and Elaine steps inside. She rushes to Sarah while John holds the intruder down. Elaine is frantic, asking Sarah if she's okay. But despite everything, Sarah still doesn't wake up. Elaine starts dragging her away from the scene, while John demands the attacker to wake up, holding a knife. Boiling with rage, John gets ready to stab the man, shouting that he better never touch Sarah again. John stabs him, and the intruder wakes up screaming in pain. At that moment, the van starts moving toward the barrier. It breaks through, injuring Arlo in the process. John notices the van speeding toward him, but there's no time to react. He takes the full impact and is launched into the air. Elaine watches in shock as John crashes nearby, completely overwhelmed. Arlo is still recovering from the damage and doesn't understand how a regular van broke through his barrier. Suddenly, the first intruder teleports next to his partner, and seeing the others down, they decide to take Sarah again. Elaine can't believe the first attacker woke up so fast, but she refuses to give up Sarah. She grabs the knife and demands they stay away. Suddenly, John begins to get up, surprising the intruders by not giving in even after being hit by a van. The stabbed attacker doesn't care and gets ready to fight again, but his partner reminds him that they're running out of time. The first intruder knows that if that thing wears off, they won't be able to do anything. John doesn't understand what they mean and is shocked to see them climbing into the van. He gives chase, forming a barrier around the entire vehicle, but just like with Arlo, his shield is pierced effortlessly by the van, sending sharp pain throughout his body. He collapses as Elaine runs to help him. They watch the van disappear into the distance without leaving any answers behind. John remains on the ground, his eyes burning with the desire for revenge. Back inside the house, Elaine is healing Arlo while John tends to himself. Arlo starts coughing up blood, and Elaine tells him to hold on since she's almost done. Arlo turns and notices John staring at him, fury burning in his eyes. Arlo tells him to stop being angry, just for one night. John coldly replies that he had only one job, irritating Arlo. Arlo demands an explanation, and John tells him that all he had to do was keep the barrier up, but he couldn't even manage that. It's entirely his fault the intruders got away. Fed up with his accusations, Arlo slams the table, yelling that the only useless one was John for leaving Serafina alone during the fight. Instead of stabbing the guy, he should have tried to pull Sarah out of danger so they'd have had a chance to capture them. Arlo tells him to reflect on his own actions instead of throwing blame around. John stands up in silence and immediately punches Arlo in the face. Elaine watches from a distance, completely terrified. Arlo glares at John, not even flinching from the hit, and John tells him to watch his mouth. Arlo has had enough. He grabs John by the shirt, ready to start a fight, but before anything happens, Elaine begs them to stop. She tells them she understands they're angry because the intruders escaped, but now the threat is gone, and Serafina is safe. They should focus on what comes next, not on fighting each other. Elaine's words get through Arlo, who lets go of John and admits she's right. That's the smartest thing to do now. But even after that, the tension lingers. They keep staring at each other with hatred. One wrong move, and they'll go at it again. After some time, things calm down. Arlo and Elaine sit at the table while John sits on the floor beside Sarah, who's resting on the sofa. John starts wondering how two high tiers were taken down by nothing more than a knife and a van. It seems absurd. Arlo begins explaining that the break-in was premeditated. Those guys knew exactly where to go and what to do. The fact that their abilities were weakened wasn't a coincidence. Elaine doesn't understand how they managed to weaken all of them, to the point that their powers were nearly useless. John finally pieces it together. Their abilities had been suppressed. That's why he couldn't sense any aura during the fight. However, Arlo still feels something doesn't add up. If they had everything under control, why would they retreat? Elaine tells him she heard them mumbling something, but couldn't make out the words. John did hear them and explains that they were worried about something wearing off, like they were on a timer. Arlo seizes the chance to mock John, welcoming him to the conversation. Elaine reflects on what John said and realizes that after the intruders were gone, her healing started working normally again. She guesses that the weakening effect left with them, and Arlo adds that it must have been temporary, forcing them to retreat once time ran out. After all that, Arlo feels certain about what happened to Sarah. She was weakened first so they could defeat her, but even then, she escaped and made it to John's house. The drug they injected her with must be what's keeping her unconscious. What Arlo still doesn't get is how they found her in the first place. They might have been tracking her, or maybe they already knew where she'd go. That final thought stuns him. He remembers her last conversation with Remy. She told him about a booth offering prizes to high tiers, and that one of those prizes had a chip inside, the same prize that Serafina had won. Arlo calls out to John and asks if he and Sarah visited Kovaro Mall a while ago and found a booth giving prizes to high tiers. John looks shocked that Arlo knew about that. Arlo continues, explaining that Remy also visited that booth and discovered a tracker inside the prize she received, as well as the one Sarah got. Arlo asks John if Sarah stopped by the house before returning to the dorms. John confirms that she spent the night. Everything clicks in John's head. Arlo tells him the house has probably been under surveillance ever since. John doesn't want to believe it and calls Arlo a liar. Arlo pushes back. Why would he lie about something like that? John still can't wrap his head around the idea that those guys had been watching him for over a month just to kidnap someone who doesn't even live there. He insists he would have noticed something. He assumes it was just bad timing, that Sarah was in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Arlo loses patience. Does John really think a bunch of random people managed to stab, drug, and pull off a coordinated attack on Serafina? John hesitates. He never heard Sarah mention a tracker in her stuffed bear. Arlo is about to explode. He just wants John to understand that they had been planning to capture her for at least a month. But John still doesn't buy it. He argues that it'd be insane to plan someone's downfall for an entire month. That remark hits Arlo hard, because that's exactly what he did to get John to reveal his true self. Arlo gives up. He can't get through to him. And in the middle of all that, Elaine sits trembling in fear. Suddenly, John turns to Arlo and asks what he thinks those guys want from Sarah, if everything he said is true. Arlo simply replies that there's no way he could know. Elaine decides to finally speak up, saying that she's worried Sarah is still not waking up, and that they should take her to the hospital and even report the incident to the authorities. Arlo agrees since it seems like the best course of action, but John stops them, saying it's better if the authorities don't get involved. They should only call Doc in the morning and talk to the headmaster of Wellston. Morning arrives and Sarah slowly begins to wake up, feeling a terrible headache. She then notices Elaine and Arlo in the house, wondering what they are doing there. Sarah still doesn't understand what's happening and doesn't remember how she ended up on the sofa in John's house. Suddenly, all the memories from her encounter with the kidnappers resurface, and she starts feeling unwell. She jumps off the sofa, waking up John, who tries to call her as she rushes to the bathroom. Sarah is throwing up and John approaches from behind, asking if she's feeling okay. She starts staring at him with a strange expression, squinting her eyes to focus her blurred vision. John becomes concerned, asking her what she's feeling since she hasn't said a word yet and is acting strangely. Sarah tells him to wait a moment. She wants to check something first. She bolts out of the bathroom and heads toward John's room. John follows her and asks what she's doing. Sarah is trembling while holding an alarm clock. A minute passes, and Sarah becomes bewildered. She suddenly collapses to the floor, and John rushes to her side, seeing her terrified expression. Sarah reveals that she cannot activate her ability. Since waking up, she's been trying, but nothing happened. She can't comprehend how something like that is even possible. She begins panicking, asking what she's supposed to do now. John places his hand on her shoulder and tries to calm her down, saying it's still too early to jump to conclusions. He adds that Sarah just woke up after being knocked out for a full day, and the drug must still be in her system. John advises calling Doc, and he's confident he'll know what to do. Sarah relaxes slightly, saying that he's right. At that moment, Arlo appears with Elaine, who is happy to see Sarah awake. Sarah doesn't seem pleased to see Arlo and asks what he's doing there, but Arlo only replies that he's glad she's awake. John interrupts, explaining to Sarah that he called Elaine to help her wake up and, by coincidence, Arlo was with her. He adds that the night before, some guys broke in and tried to take her, probably the same people who drugged her, and thanks to Arlo, they managed to stop them. But since one of the intruders had an ability dampening effect, they couldn't capture them. John ends by saying that everything turned out fine since she's safe, while Arlo watches him, realizing how fake he truly is. John then thanks Arlo for his help and calls him Buddy, irritating Arlo to an unbelievable level. Arlo can't believe John is acting like a completely different person. Arlo tells him that he's not his buddy, while Elaine stays silent, careful not to reveal anything by accident. John asks Arlo to lend him his phone to call Doc, and adds that some jerks broke his, exposing a hint on his true personality. Arlo hands him the phone, asking if he really has Doc's number. John says that Doc didn't think he could take care of himself, so he gave him the number in case of emergencies. John starts dialing, while Sarah looks down at the floor, still deeply concerned about her ability. The Doc picks up his phone, revealing that his name is Darren. John immediately greets him, and at that instant, the Doc hangs up, causing Arlo to let out a soft laugh. Arlo is amused to see that John really has someone backing him up, and John tells them not to worry, he'll just call him again. John waits, and the Doc picks up once more, but this time he starts yelling, demanding to know what the hell John wants on a Saturday at 7 a.m. The Doc is about to hang up again, but John quickly says there's something wrong with Serafina. The Doc asks what exactly is happening with her. John replies that they're not sure yet, and asks if they could meet at the infirmary in half an hour. The Doc starts yelling incoherent things and hangs up loudly. Arlo asks what the doctor said, and John responds that everything's fine and they should head out. At Wellston's infirmary, the Doc tells Sarah that everything appears normal, and that it's the first time he's seen a drug capable of suppressing abilities. He took a blood sample, and will inform her once the analysis is complete. The Doc explains that the effects shouldn't last more than 4 days, and if her ability doesn't return, she should come back. Darren then asks John if they already spoke with the headmaster about the situation, and John confirms, saying that Elaine and Arlo are handling it. The Doc advises them to keep all this information to themselves since other students might try to take advantage if they find out. He glares at John with frustration, saying he doesn't need more work on his plate. Darren tells them they're free to go and warns them not to call him again, while John thanks him for everything. John adds an apology for waking him up so early on a weekend. Darren glances at him and tells them to leave already. He keeps grumbling, hating that he thought becoming a school nurse would be an easy job without weekend duties. John and Sarah finally exit the infirmary, while Sarah says that this whole situation feels surreal. But John tells her not to worry. Living without an ability isn't so bad, since he's been doing it his entire life. He adds that 4 days will pass quickly and no one will find out. Sarah is still concerned but remains hopeful, thinking her powers will return soon. Meanwhile, in the headmaster's office, he is thanking Arlo and Elaine for reporting the incident. He adds that he'll inform Keen, the head of security, and asks if there's anything else they want to share. Arlo says that's all they had to report and proceeds to leave the office. Elaine mentions that she still can't grasp how those guys managed to escape even with Arlo fighting them. She's unsettled by the thought that they might have more tricks up their sleeves. Arlo tries to reassure her, saying that now the headmaster is aware of everything and will handle it. He asks if there's still something bothering her, and Elaine admits she wasn't expecting John to be ranked so high. Seeing someone like him with that level of power makes her uneasy. Arlo dismisses her concerns. John was always strong. The only difference now is that they have more information about him than before. Everything else is just the same, so she shouldn't worry. Arlo yawns and decides to head back to sleep, advising Elaine to do the same since she stayed up all night healing them. They go their separate ways, and Elaine remains in the hallway for a while, smiling. She feels more at ease. She's sure that after a while everything will return to normal, with John pretending to be a cripple and Serafina keeping him in check. A new week starts, and Serafina enters the campus as usual. Everyone turns toward her, surprised to see her back after some time. They start whispering, wondering what she did to get suspended. Sarah walks through the hallway, noticing how everyone gets intimidated by her presence, and in one of the newspapers, she spots an article discussing her return after a month-long suspension. She keeps walking, drawing everyone's attention, including Blake and Eisen. Blake mentions that she's cool as always, while Eisen starts tearing up, happy to see that she's finally back. Blake calls him a weirdo for crying over a girl, but inwardly, Eisen knows that with Serafina back, he doesn't need to worry about John anymore. With her keeping him in check, the hierarchy is safe. Back in the headmaster's office, he's sipping a cup of coffee when someone knocks on the door. He tells the person to enter, and it turns out to be John. The headmaster asks what brings him there and offers him a seat. John declines the offer. He just wants to ask about the notice the headmaster sent him that morning. The headmaster asks if there's something wrong with it. John tells him he can't just order him to move onto campus. He's doing perfectly fine living in his own house. The headmaster looks at him seriously and tells him that the decision is final and that his room on campus is ready. He continues, saying that after school, John will need to pack his things and Keen will help him transport everything to the dorms. And from that point on, he'll be under staff protection. John still tries to protest, saying he can take care of himself. But the headmaster disagrees, saying that reasoning no longer applies, especially after what happened on Friday. He can't ignore the fact that his top students were injured by a group of unknown individuals. He tells John that his house is compromised, and no matter how strong he thinks he is, that place isn't safe anymore. John then asks if he can be moved to a different housing complex, but the headmaster refuses while calmly sipping his coffee. John starts pleading. He really doesn't want to be around other students. The headmaster has already made up his mind, and John will have to move onto campus whether he likes it or not. John tries one more time, but the headmaster interrupts, saying there's no point in continuing and tells him to leave as the decision won't change. John finally complies, leaving the office without another word. On the rooftop, Sarah is resting while using her phone. Suddenly, John opens the door and sits next to her. He asks how her day has been so far. Sarah says that everything is the same. Students keep staring at her constantly, to the point she thinks they might find out the truth. John stares at her oddly, making Sarah wonder what's going through his head. John tells her she should change her attitude. She only needs to keep things together for a few days and everything will be fine. Sarah replies that the whole situation doesn't sit right with her. She doesn't like that her entire schedule was changed just to hide her lost ability, but John reminds her that it's only temporary. She says it feels unnecessary and that she doesn't really care if everyone finds out. Even if they knew, she's confident they would still be too afraid to challenge her. She doesn't even mind if the school publicly announces it. She isn't aware of what might happen if the secret spreads, but John is. He quietly says that people become cruel when they get the chance to step on you. But Sarah couldn't hear his last comment, and John advises her to keep it a secret just in case. Sarah counters, asking what happened to his old self, the one who always wanted to have fun no matter what. She's sure that a few broken bones won't stop her. John gets irritated. He enjoys having fun, but that's different from self-sabotage. He's only trying to keep her safe. But Sarah still believes that a couple trips to the infirmary aren't a big deal. John starts getting serious, explaining that when you're in situations where you can't fight, it starts affecting you. Not physically, but mentally. You begin to feel trapped, angry, and disconnected from yourself. Sarah looks away, realizing that John has been acting differently since she woke up. He's colder now, more distant. John tells her there's no reason to risk going through all of that, especially if it can be avoided. He looks genuinely concerned and finishes by telling Sarah to be careful, at least for this week. Sarah finally understands, which surprises John. She says she'll follow his advice. He must be insisting so much for a reason. John finally leaves the rooftop, and as he reaches the hallway, he hears someone screaming. It's another victim being attacked by a bully. John pauses for a moment, watching as the bully continues beating the guy, but then simply looks away and walks off minding his own business. Arlo is now walking down the hallway and spots Blake putting up an announcement on the bulletin board. Arlo calls out to him and asks what he's doing, since it's kind of odd seeing him post flyers. Blake replies that he's just helping Remy and hands one of the flyers to Arlo. He starts reading its contents and is shocked to see that it's a warning about Ember's attacks around the Wellston area. Arlo asks what kind of nonsense Remy is thinking, bringing up the Ember organization, but Blake doesn't understand either. He just tells Arlo that Remy has been asking Ison to analyze Ember's movements. Blake continues, saying that Remy printed the flyers that morning and gave them to him to distribute. She seems almost obsessed with the topic. Normally, she forgets her interests after a few days, but she's stuck with this one for over a month, enough to freak him out. Blake adds that Ember is no joke, since they're capable of taking down superheroes, and he guesses Remy is still sensitive about her brother's death. Hearing that, Arlo remembers that Remy mentioned Ember during their last conversation. Blake asks Arlo to talk with her, but just then, Remy appears. She rushes to Blake and gives him another stack of flyers in case he runs out. She spots Arlo and asks him to help them as well. Remy says that students will be more aware if they all hand out flyers, but before she can finish, Arlo says he'll pass. She doesn't argue and moves on with her mission. She spots a random guy walking by and shouts at him. The poor guy is completely startled and asks what the queen wants. Remy hands him a flyer and approaches menacingly, telling him to stay alert since there's a murderous group out there and he could be their next victim. The guy bolts away, completely scared and confused about what just happened, while Remy smiles, as if she just saved another life. However, Arlo calls her out, asking what exactly she's trying to do. He says that students will start panicking for real if she keeps spreading that kind of info. But Remy says that's the whole point. Their duty as royals is to make students feel safe, but too much comfort is dangerous, so she wants to make sure no one gets hurt by threats like Ember. Remy thinks the best approach is spreading awareness, but Arlo counters that she's basically telling everyone they're going to die. Remy insists she's doing the right thing and believes keeping students on high alert is the best course. Arlo starts getting strange vibes from the situation and glances at Blake, who is signaling that Remy is going off the rails. Remy rushes off to hand out more flyers, while Blake looks at Arlo, silently begging for help. Arlo calls out to Remy and invites her to grab a drink after school, and she agrees. Remy also invites Blake, but he declines, saying he has to return early to his dorm. Apparently, someone is moving in on very short notice. We move to the Wellston dorms, where Keen is helping John move his belongings. Keen asks if John is excited about living on campus, but John looks completely displeased since he was basically forced to move in. Keen tries to cheer him up, mentioning that living on campus has perks, like not wasting half an hour walking to school. But John counters that he enjoys walking since it helps him calm down. Keen tries to pivot, saying he can still walk around campus, but John finds walking in circles for 30 minutes stupid. Suddenly, a blue-haired boy greets Keen and approaches, brushing past John like he didn't even see him. Keen calls him Zeke and says he's helping John move onto campus. Zeke pretends to be glad that the school cripple is finally joining them. Keen tells him to remind everyone to take care of John. He's too naive to notice how everyone has been treating him. With a sinister look, Zeke promises they'll treat him very carefully. Now we move to dorm 311, where Blake is doing some homework. Someone knocks on the door and he goes to open it. He's stunned to see who his new roommate is. John and Keen enter, and Keen is surprised that John didn't have much stuff despite living in a big apartment. John mentions that the apartment the headmaster gave him came fully furnished, so he only had to buy clothes and school supplies. Blake's expression fills with anger as he recognizes John. He recalls the moment John slapped Remy when she tried to help him pick up some papers. Upon seeing Blake, Keen is glad he's already back, despite having jack duties, and proceeds to introduce them. Blake glares at John while Keen continues, and John stares back just as intensely. He also remembers nearly getting roasted by Blake's lasers during the paper incident. Blake says they already know each other, and Keen immediately senses the tension. He awkwardly grabs both their arms, urging them to smile and forcing a handshake. Both Blake and John are disgusted at having to share a room, but they know they'll have to make it work somehow. Now we are on the street where Remy is running at full speed. Apparently, she lost track of time and is going to be late to meet Arlo. Suddenly, she stops in front of a wall filled with TVs where the news is being shown. She hears that authorities still don't have any leads on Ember, despite facing attacks for a couple of months. In a cafe, Arlo is sipping some coffee as he waits for Remy. He starts recalling his last conversation with Ray, Remy's older brother, after Ray graduated from Wellston. Ray wanted to have one final talk with his successor. He tells Arlo that he's going to be the youngest king in Wellston's history and should be proud of it, but Arlo doesn't think much of it. After all, he was king in middle school and believes it will be the same. Ray tells him not to be too cocky. He's not the only one at Wellston who was king or queen in middle school, so he shouldn't slack off. Someone could surpass him. Once he starts his second year, the freshmen, his classmates, and new transfers will be aiming for his position, so he better watch his back to avoid being dethroned too quickly. Arlo smiles with pride, saying that he intends to keep the title for as long as he's at Wellston. Ray is glad to see him full of confidence and says he'll hold him to his words, so Arlo better not disappoint him. Back in the present, Arlo feels like he didn't keep his promise due to hold the situation with John. Suddenly, Remy enters the cafe, and Arlo mocks her for being late. He tells her to sit down. He's already ordered a drink for her. Remy starts drinking without saying a word, and Arlo asks her to explain why she made him wait so long. Remy tells him she got distracted by the news on TV. They were reporting more attacks by Ember. Arlo tells her she seems obsessed with them, despite them not having anything to do with her. He advises her to stop worrying about it, but as soon as he finishes, Remy stands up and slams the table. She's furious because she feels everyone is trying to ignore the fact that people are dying out there. Remy knows Blake and Eason want her to stop, and she's sure Arlo came to talk because of them. Arlo stoically says she should stop overstepping her boundaries, reminding her that there are authorities focused on investigating Ember, and that's not a place for a high school student. Remy doesn't buy it. She thinks the authorities are just dragging their feet since it's been months, and there are still no results. She starts yelling, asking how many superheroes have to die before someone actually does something. The entire cafe is filled with tension after Remy's outburst. She notices and sits down again, slightly ashamed. Arlo remains composed. He wants to know exactly why she feels the need to be personally involved, and hopes she doesn't say it's just because she's a fan of superheroes. Remy has a defiant look in her eyes and asks if it would be a problem if she were. Arlo asks her why she wants to associate with them. To him, they're just a bunch of fools seeking attention. Remy slams the table again, even spilling her drink. She demands Arlo take that back. She raises her voice again, saying that superheroes are people who want to help everyone and use their powers for good. Remy adds that they're just trying to give others a chance, exactly like her brother used to. Remy's eyes begin to fill with tears, and Arlo finally understands where she's coming from. His mind starts racing. He just realized that after all this time, he never actually knew how Ray died. Suddenly, a pink-haired girl pours a drink over Remy's head. She starts shouting, tired of hearing Remy talk about superheroes, and says that only idiots admire those maniacs. Remy glares at her with a threatening look and demands an apology. But the girl ignores her and keeps yelling about how her date is being ruined by the shouting. Suddenly, Arlo stands up, saying that what she just did was completely uncalled for. The girl tries to act tough, claiming that her uniform is from Agwin's school, and warns him to mind his words if he doesn't want to get beaten. Arlo starts laughing, and the girl starts fuming. Arlo mocks her, saying he's shaking in fear. Remy joins in, saying she doesn't care which school they're from. She's still waiting for her apology. The girl shoves Remy, telling her to get lost. But as soon as she makes contact, Remy activates her ability and shocks the girl with electricity. The girl stumbles back in pain but doesn't give up. She activates her power, covering her hand with pink energy and lunges forward to punch Remy. But Remy easily dodges and places 2 fingers on her neck, electrocuting the girl so hard she collapses, needing help from her friend to get back up. The girl finally gives in, and the two start leaving the cafe. But Arlo stops them, creating a barrier and trapping them inside. Remy tells him to stop. The fight is already over. Arlo says he still hasn't heard the magic word. The guy tells the pink-haired girl if she also heard Remy call Arlo by his name. The girl confirms it, and after seeing the shield and lightning abilities, realizes they just messed with the king and queen of Wellston. She gives in and apologizes for all the trouble they caused. Arlo smiles, pleased to see weaklings apologize to their superiors, and finally lets them go. He smiles with pride. He feels like a true king again. Remy says she's heading back, but Arlo tries to make her stay. After all, she just got there. But Remy doesn't want to stay anymore. She hates how Arlo always takes things too far, even after the fight is clearly over. She's furious and calls him an idiot before storming out. She keeps yelling as she exits the cafe, angry that now she'll have to wash all her clothes. We go back to the dorms where Blake is waking up and immediately heads to the bathroom. Upon opening the door, he finds John fixing his hair. Apparently, he forgot John moved in yesterday. John tells him that next time he should knock first, and Blake slams the door shut without saying a word. Later on, Blyke is walking around campus with Ison. The latter says that Remy mentioned Blyke has a new roommate. Blyke confirms, and Ison asks who the lucky guy is. Blyke tells him that his new roommate is John, and Ison spits out his drink in shock. Ison begs him to say he's joking, but Blyke confirms it. He doesn't understand how he ended up being paired with John. Being the strongest male in his year, he expected to be roomed with someone of similar power. Ison can only listen to his complaints, unable to reveal anything about how powerful John actually is. He just tells Blyke to relax. It can't be that bad. But Blyke counters, saying that John hogged the bathroom for over 30 minutes that morning. Ison forces a laugh, trying to downplay it, and suggests that maybe Blyke should cut him some slack since John's just a cripple. Blyke is taken aback by Ison's reaction and tells him not to forget what John did to Remy. Ison insists that it happened ages ago, and he's sure Remy already got over it. Ison is clearly trying to stop anyone from messing with John. Blyke glares at him, pointing out that he's noticed how obsessed Ison has become with John lately. He's seen him looking at John's old photos, even stalking him around campus, and now he's defending him. He demands to know what Ison is trying to do. Ison gets cornered and, in a panic, spits his drink all over Blyke's face. He runs off, claiming he has an important club meeting. Blyke doesn't give up and decides to chase Ison to get his answers. We move to the school rooftop, where Sarah is surprised to hear that Blyke is John's new roommate. She thinks it's not too bad, but John says he's afraid Blyke might try to kill him in his sleep. After all, he's always glaring at him with hate. Sarah dismisses his concerns. She knows Blyke has better things to do. He doesn't get involved in other people's business unless provoked. Then she adds that, actually, Blyke could be a threat, since John's specialty is pissing people off. John gets annoyed and asks why she's defending Blyke. She casually reveals that she was the one who crowned Blyke as Jack, surprising John. He thought Arlo made that call. Sarah explains that Arlo would never choose Blyke over Cecile, who is a high tier. She simply overruled him. When she was promoted to ace, Arlo and Remy couldn't agree on who should fill the position, so she made the decision herself. She adds that Arlo was furious about her choice, and that's why they stopped getting along. He felt like she hurt the hierarchy. Sarah laughs, recalling how priceless Arlo's expression was. John asks if she picked Blyke just to spite Arlo. Sarah replies that was just a bonus. She genuinely believed Blyke was the better option for Jack, even if Cecile was stronger. She always felt Cecile hides things from her classmates, making it hard to trust her. Blyke, on the other hand, is more open and straightforward. She finishes by saying that trust is more valuable than strength, and she believes John could get along with Blyke if he gave him a chance. But John refuses. He's convinced that Blyke will blast him with his lasers before they even talk. Sarah calls him out. She's getting tired of his attitude. She reminds him that this kind of stuff never stopped him before. He was annoying even when they first met, despite knowing how strong she was. And now they're close friends. So, what changed? She asks him what happened to that John. John doesn't respond. He only thinks to himself that he wonders the same thing. Later, Sarah is walking through the hallway and crosses paths with a bully stepping on a girl's papers. The girl is bruised and keeps apologizing, trying to get to her next class. Sarah simply walks past, not giving it much attention. But she notices the situation getting worse, and something inside her tells her she needs to intervene. The bully is about to hit the girl again, but suddenly, Sarah steps in and blocks the attack. The bully freezes in fear, screaming at the sight of Sarah. While holding the bully, Sarah calls the girl who is on the floor and tells her to go to her next class. She stands up immediately as the bully argues with Sarah, asking why she's stopping her. Sarah remains unfazed and only glances at the bully, reminding her not to waste other people's time, and the bully looks at her with fear. Sarah continues on her way as if nothing happened, but the female bully looks frustrated, wondering what she did wrong. And in that instant, contemptuous comments towards her fill the alley from the other students who saw the scene. The shame starts filling her head, making her wonder in anger why she's being humiliated for dealing with a low tier. Her emotions start overflowing and clouding her judgment. She yells at Sarah, telling her that she should look after them, not the weaklings, while launching an attack. That flies at full speed towards Sarah, giving her no time to react. But luckily, a shield appears, protecting Sarah from any damage. Arlo calmly walks towards the attacker, making her shake just by his presence. If Sarah almost made her cry, now with Arlo her soul is practically about to leave her body. As relaxed as always, Arlo demands an explanation for the attack towards the queen of the school. The girl tries to excuse herself, but before she can say anything, a shield appears and forces her against the ground. The girl yells in desperation, begging for mercy and forgiveness. But Arlo keeps the show going a little longer, threatening everyone watching that if they ever attempt to defy the hierarchy, they will have to directly answer to him. Arlo faces Sarah and tells her to accompany him. There's something they need to discuss. They go to one of the classrooms, and immediately Arlo tells her that all of that happened because she stopped asserting herself in the school, skipping classes and turf wars. She's even been out for a month, so she practically lost her presence at the school. But Sarah doesn't care about his words, even less if they are a lecture. Arlo is still upset, wondering why she would risk losing her cover just to help a random low tier. Doesn't she realize that the hierarchy could be in danger if events like that repeat? But Sarah keeps the same attitude, reminding Arlo that it wouldn't have affected him, and if for some reason she got discovered, Arlo would still sit on his throne. But something bothers Sarah. She is a cripple now, so according to Arlo's rules, she should be at the bottom, being humiliated by others. Then, exactly why Arlo decided to step in this time? Is there a reason why he'd decide to help a cripple? In that moment, Arlo remembers his last conversation with John, where he told him that Sarah was going to be a cripple for a while. And immediately after that, he got threatened by John, who told him that if he sees a scratch on Sarah, he'll be responsible, revealing that Arlo defended Sarah because he had no other option. Sarah is still waiting for an answer, and Arlo replies that her state is only temporary, so that's why he doesn't want to cause a disruption in order. Arlo adds that since Sarah is ranked higher than him, he'll watch her back until she recovers. But Sarah doesn't buy it even a bit. She's been manipulated multiple times and knows that Arlo only involves himself with her for hidden reasons. Sarah finishes saying that he should stay away from her while leaving the classroom. Now outside the school, Sarah is checking her phone. She's scrolling through the calls she missed while being fainted and is surprised to see many lost calls from Fiora, her servant. Sarah is surprised to see that Fiora tried to contact her, especially during school hours. She keeps scrolling and is surprised to see an outgoing call to Arlo the same day of the incident. Apparently, John never mentioned anything about the call. Sarah remembers that he told her that Arlo was already in John's house, so there's no reason to call him and especially hide it from her. Something in John's story doesn't add up and is starting to bother Sarah. She knows that Arlo values his time and wouldn't waste it hanging around with Elaine unless he had something to gain. In that moment, Sarah remembers the state John was in after she came back to his house, and starts squeezing her phone, promising to go after Arlo if he dared to drag John into his plans. Now we move to the press room, where a conversation is being played. Cecile is inside reading some documents, while listening to the recorded conversation between Arlo and Elaine. Cecile gets more worried by the second when she hears that John was the person who injured Arlo, and the pictures displayed in the documents show how serious the situation was. For her, it is unbelievable that such a low tier had beaten Arlo. She is in disbelief that such a story appeared after Remy's incident in the mall. Inwardly, Cecile is praising Terrence for getting the news of the century. The whole school will be shocked and Arlo will get demoted. But she knows that there's no point in that since there's no way the article will ever get past Arlo. We go back to the past, right after the moment Cecile revealed to Arlo that she had a guy called Terrence helping her. Arlo asks about his rank and his ability. Cecile tries her best to hide the information by calling Terrence a nobody. But Arlo simply tells her to answer the questions before he loses his patience. Cecile knows she's against a wall and reveals that Terrence is a lower mid-tier from second year, and that his ability is invisibility. Arlo laughs, saying that he must be very useful for the school press. Immediately after, he mentions the real reason why he went to the press room. From that day on, Cecile will hand Arlo a copy of all the news Terrence submits, and any news regarding the royals must be approved by him. Cecile yells at him, telling him that he can't do that since her responsibility is to deliver the truth to the students without being biased by a third party. But Arlo remains calm, asking who she is to tell him what he can and cannot do. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.